This is the public hearing of the City Council Legislative Oversight Committee. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony on bills number 17118, 17119, 171120, 171121, 171122, 171123, 171124, 171126, 171127, and Resolution 170942. I am Councilman Kenyatta Johnson. I am the chairman of the Council's Legislative Oversight Committee. I recognize the presence of a quorum with the following committee members: Councilman Derek Green, Councilwoman Helen Gim, and Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown. Today we have several bills on our agenda that have come out of Council's Regulatory Reform Commission that's chaired by Councilman Derek Green. We will be taking testimony from the administration on those bills before moving to a public meeting to consider action on those bills. Following that, we will be moving back to our public hearing for testimony on Resolution 170942. And with that being said, can the clerk please read the titles of the bills? 171118, an ordinance amending Chapter 10-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Safety by repealing certain provisions of Section 10-806 relating to construction of viewing stands and amending other provisions of said section, all under certain terms and conditions. 171119, an ordinance amending Chapter 9-400 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Carriers by repealing certain provisions relating to motor buses, all under certain terms and conditions. 171120, an ordinance amending Chapter 9-700 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Amusement Buses by repealing Section 9-704 relating to motion pictures, all under certain terms and conditions. 171121, an ordinance amending Chapter 9-600 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Service and Other Businesses by repealing certain provisions related to refuse collection, all under certain terms and conditions. 171122, an ordinance amending Chapter 10-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Safety by repealing certain provisions relating to excavations and obstructions, all under certain terms and conditions. 171123, an ordinance amending Chapter 9-700 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Amusement Businesses by repealing Section 9-708 relating to compulsory vehicular amusement device insurance, all under certain terms and conditions. 171124, an ordinance amending Chapter 9-600 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Services and Other Businesses by repealing Section 9-630 relating to sale of used cars, all under certain terms and conditions. 171126, an ordinance amending Chapter 10-800 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Safety by repealing certain provisions relating to police and fire radio broadcasts, all under certain terms and conditions. 171127, an ordinance repealing Chapter 13-700 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Garbage Disposal Units, all under certain terms and conditions. Before I ask for the clerk to call up for witnesses, I want to have the chair of the Regulatory Review Committee, Councilman Derek Green, to offer his few remarks, and then we'll call up witnesses to provide testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today's hearing and the legislation that was introduced for repeal are a continuation of an initiative that we started last year that was started by the Council President, Darrell Clark, as well as working in conjunction with our Commerce Director, Harold Epps, is one of the co-chairs, along with myself, and the President CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, Rob Wunderling. And this is an initiative to not only take out legislation that has been antiquated, that's been in the code for some time, but also has fostered a unique relationship between the business community as well as the public sector to talk about how we can improve and enhance the business climate in the city of Philadelphia. Since this initiative has started, we have now been working with various city departments to propose legislation and regulations that they've seen that's been antiquated, that's impacted their ability to move forward and have better relationships with the business community. Today's legislation is one aspect of that. In our conversations with L&I Commissioner Dave Perry. He's proposed information and legislation that goes along to that degree, and we're using this as a model to talk with other city departments on how they can propose legislation as well as regulations that they believe should be removed from the code or from our regulatory framework that impacts their ability to do their job and also work with small businesses as well as other businesses throughout the greater Philadelphia community. So this is another step in that goal. The special committee will be having its next quarterly meeting on March 7th, and we will continue to work as a committee and also with our various subcommittees that are focusing on various industries in the city of Philadelphia to improve and enhance our business climate so that way we can have small businesses grow, employ more people in the city of Philadelphia, and get to what I say is the #1 issue in our city, which is poverty. And by growing the number of successful small businesses and large businesses in our city, they'll be able to employ more people, reduce our poverty, and we ultimately will be able to reduce taxes because we'll have a larger base of businesses, and we will be able to rely on more businesses and have more money coming to the general fund and have less taxes. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman and Mr. Chairman. Will the clerk please call up the witnesses for these bills, please?
Jonathan Snyder. Thank you.
Please state your name and title and the microphone for the record, please.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan Snyder, Director of Business Financial Resources for the Department of Commerce.
You can proceed.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Legislative Oversight Committee. My name is Jonathan Snyder, and I serve as Director of Business Financial Resources for the City of Philadelphia Department of Commerce. I'm here to testify in support of 9 bills which repeal code provisions that have been deemed archaic or no longer necessary. These are bills number 171118, repeal of reviewing stands permit, bill number 171119, repeal of motor bus carrier license, bill number 171120, repeal of motion picture obscenity ordinance, bill number 171121, repeal of private garbage collection license, bill number 171122, repeal of excavation and obstruction ordinance, bill number 171123, repeal of compulsory vehicular device insurance, bill number 171124, repeal of sale of used cars ordinance, bill number 171126, repeal of police and fire scanner permit, bill number 171127, repeal of garbage disposal unit ordinance. The Special Committee for Regulatory Reform was established in the spring of 2017 by Resolution 170179. The purpose of this committee is to identify outdated and unneeded provisions in the Philadelphia Code and in administrative regulations and recommend revisions that will make it easier to open and operate businesses in Philadelphia. The committee's process includes members of City Council and their staff, Department of Commerce leadership, and members of the business community who have been appointed by the Council President. Through dialogue between and among stakeholders, the Special Committee is formulating recommendations that will help improve and modernize Philadelphia's business environment and ensure that good jobs are being created in this city. This past December, the Special Committee identified 7 outdated provisions which were repealed thanks to the cooperation between City Council, private employers who serve on the committee, and multiple city departments. By repealing the 9 archaic and outdated code provisions that we are discussing today, we will continue to streamline the code itself, making it more current and accessible. The administration supports these 9 bills. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much. Any questions for our panelists from members of the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else to testify on these bills? Okay, thank you very much. This concludes the public hearing on bills number 17118, 17119, 17120, 17121, 17122, 17123, 17124, 171126, and bill number 171127. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on these bills. The chair recognizes Councilman Derek Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that bills numbered 171118, 171119, 171120, 171121, 171122, 171123, 171124, 171126, and 171127 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at our next session, of these bills at our next session of council.
It has been moved and properly seconded that these bills be reported from the committee with a favorable recommendation, and further moved that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of these bills at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Those bills will be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation with a request that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading at the next session of council. This concludes the public meeting, and we will now return to our public hearing, but I also want to thank publicly the chairman of the Special Committee on Regulatory Review, Councilman Derek Green, for his hard work on these particular bills. Councilwoman Helen Gibb.
I also wanted to duplicate your sentiments and just want to thank Councilman Green for his great work on reviewing some of these regulations. It's really important that we keep our laws updated and responsive to these times, so thanks for your great work on that.
Thank you. Will the clerk please read the title of the resolution?
170942, a resolution authorizing the Standing Committee on Legislative Oversight to hold hearings to examine progress and implementation of Tax Reform Commission recommendations, the impact of implemented recommendations, and further opportunities for advancing the competitiveness of Philadelphia's tax structure.
Thank you very much. Just before we get started, just briefly, first I want to acknowledge Councilman Alan Dom for being here today as well, who I'm sure will provide some great insight to this discussion. The formation of this resolution, which is based upon my brief time serving as a council member and my former life serving as a state representative, and working with members of the business community as it relates to how we can make Philadelphia a more business-friendly and competitive city, particularly looking at our tax structure. We have 17 taxes on the book that some may tell you have a significant impact on why an individual will decide to do business or not to do business on this side of City Line Avenue. And so as I decided to move forward as a councilman in the 2nd Councilmanic District, I sit on the board of PIDC, which is the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, where we work very closely with Liberty Property Trust and the development that's taking place down at the Navy Yard. I also sit on the Philadelphia International Airport Advisory Board. We're overseeing an $8.1 billion expansion. I also work very closely as the chairman of the Public Utilities Committee and Transportation, Public Utilities and Transportation Committee. We work very closely with Philadelphia Energy Solutions, as well as we have a new casino coming in my district called Live Casino at 10th and Packer, and work very closely with the Phillies, the Flyers, the Sixers, and now the Super Bowl champion Eagles. And part of that process has required my office to engage in various dialogues regarding the business environment here in the city of Philadelphia. And oftentimes we get good marks, and oftentimes I do hear that we should be receiving bad marks based upon our relationship with the business community, and how sometimes the things that we propose could be very regressive and have a significant negative impact on the business environment here in the city of Philadelphia from a tax standpoint. And so we decided in my office and working with my staff to put together this hearing just to provide a platform for those in the business community to come and express their opinion on our tax structure here in the city of Philadelphia. And hopefully we can continue to create a dialogue and some concrete ways how we can improve the business environment here in the city of Philadelphia. And so with that being said, I'm going to open it up for any of my colleagues who would like to make a comment. Okay, if not, can the clerk please call the first panel of witnesses, please?
Frank Breslin and Harold Epps.
No introduction, but for the record, sir, can you state your name and your title, both of you, for the record? You can start your testimony after.
Mr. Chair, I'm Harold T. Epps, Director of Commerce for the City of Philadelphia.
Frank Breslin, Revenue Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson and members of the Committee on Legislative Oversight. Again, my name is Harold T. Epps, and I am the Director of Commerce for the City of Philadelphia. I am here today to provide testimony regarding Resolution Number 170942, which authorizes hearings to examine progress in implementation of Tax Reform Commission recommendations, the impact of implemented recommendations, and further opportunities for enhancing the competitiveness of Philadelphia's tax structure. As you well know, these are topics that I care a lot about and are central to my role as Commerce Director. In fact, I have spent nearly a decade studying and making recommendations related to Philadelphia's business environment and economic competitiveness. Prior to becoming Commerce Director, I experienced firsthand the impact of running a business within the City of Philadelphia. Since coming to Philadelphia in 2008, I have loved living in this city, but have worked in company leadership in other cities throughout the United States. And as a result, I can attest that Philadelphia has a lot of work to do to become more competitive. Even before becoming Commerce Director, I have wanted to contribute to Philadelphia's economic growth, which is why I was honored to serve as co-chair of the Mayor's Task Force on Tax Policy and Economic Competitiveness in 2009. The purpose of this task force was to examine tax structure and the real estate market and provide recommendations. The task force provided numerous recommendations that I am pleased to report that some progress has been made on these. I have included an addendum with my testimony outlining the progress on each of the recommendations of the 2009 task force, and will share with you today a sampling, and I just mean a sampling, of some of the key recommendations and progress to date. Number one, recommendation was to reduce the wage tax to 2.7% by 2025. The status is the rates are now 3.9004% for residents and 3.4741 for non-residents. And on behalf of the administration, we are committed to continue these reductions. Recommendation number two was to reduce the net income portion of BERT from 6.45% to 6% by 2025. The 2018 rate is 6.3%, and the city again is committed to continuing reductions of BERT. Further, as of 2016, all businesses receive an exemption on the first $100,000 in gross revenue. Thirdly, our recommendation was to adopt a single sales factor apportionment. The status is adopted in 2017. Next recommendation was to gradually increase tax revenue from real estate. The Actual Value Initiative, AVI, implemented in 2014. Real estate tax revenue increased from $403.4 million in 2009 to $583.1 million in 2017. Realty transfer tax revenue doubled from $115.7 million in 2009 to $232.9 million in 2017. And finally, the recommendation was to improve tax collection and compliance. The status is total delinquent principal for active periods has decreased from $555.8 million in 2007 to $306.1 million in 2017, a decrease of 44.9%. These are some of the examples to speak to the incremental progress that the city has made to improve the business environment. And I should add that these policy changes have been accompanied by positive economic indicators. Philadelphia's population grew from 1.45 million in 2009 to 1.57 million in 2017. Unemployment in 2009 was 10.1%, and now it is at 5.7%. And our job growth rate have surpassed the national average for 2 consecutive years. Despite these positive trends, our poverty rate is stubbornly stuck at 25.7%, affecting nearly 400,000 of our residents. It is my hope that the increase in tax revenue resulting from these policy changes, a $1.3 billion increase since the participation in the task force, and I will provide us with financial resources to commit to education and workforce development, the best tools we have for tackling this urgent issue. It is also important that we capitalize on improved revenue streams by improving the health of our general fund. A healthy general fund will improve our bond rating, which will lower the city's debt service over time. As a city, we must pick up the pace in making the reforms that are necessary to attract and retain more companies like, and no day goes by that I don't mention the word Amazon, so like Amazon and Apple, Five Below, Yards, and Comcast, just to name a few. And as we make the government more attractive, we can attract more talent, more investment, and tax revenue. As we streamline and modernize government, investments in technology lead to decreased costs and improved revenue will capture over time. As Commerce Director, I am committed to working with the Council and our colleagues in the Revenue Department and throughout the administration and others to inform and enact changes that will continue to make Philadelphia a more desirable place to do business and increase our competitive position nationally and internationally. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
I don't have any formal testimony today. My testimony would pretty much echo what the Commerce Director has stated, that many of the recommendations in the Tax Reform Commission have been adopted, and that we continue to work closely with our stakeholders and with our departmental partners to continue to make progress and make our tax structure more competitive.
Thank you very much. What's our current bond rating?
I'm sorry?
What's the City of Philadelphia's current bond rating?
I don't know the bond rating. That would be the Treasurer's Office.
Okay. Would you happen to know?
I do not, but I do know it's not as high as we would like it to be.
In terms of, in part of this conversation, when we were putting together this hearing also was around our pitch for Amazon. And I remember I would read various sources online while we were going through the process of applying for the RFP for Amazon. I think we did it. Now I think we did an excellent job. But this issue around the City of Philadelphia and its competitiveness around our tax structure may be our Achilles heel. Your experience as we went after Amazon, were any of these types of conversations, did they arise? Any major concerns around it? And did it shift how we do business as a city moving forward as it relates to our tax policy?
So we did a lot of assessment as we prepared the first phase of the Amazon proposal. And our conclusion was the following, and it was backed up by third-party research, that when it came to assets, location, and affordability, Philadelphia would weigh very favorably in the requirements that the RFP called for. But when it came to state and city business friendliness and tax structure, if those were the deciding factors, that Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania would not likely be in the first tier of competitiveness. And that was just what the data says. It was stated earlier, we have 17 tax categories. The stacking of our city and state taxes on top of one another, and you'll hear more about that later from some of the other panels, would not yield Philadelphia to be, again, in the category of, that would be defined as best in class.
That would be defined as what?
Best in class. There are many other cities and states that have a much more competitive business and tax structure than Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania.
Is the administration currently looking at it as a lesson to see if we can begin shifting and or reforming our current tax policy moving forward, just based upon what we learned from Amazon, from the Amazon pitch, to shift how we do business moving forward?
I would refer back to when I first sat here the first time, 2009, what we said was that our tax structure needed to continue to be streamlined and improved, and what I would say a decade later, and I had no idea at that point I'd be doing this job, by the way, we have made some progress, but not nearly fast enough. One of my favorite lines is, everything about Philadelphia is going in the right direction, we just need to go faster. And so our wage tax, our BERT tax, our categories of tax, again, need further ratification and streamline. Taking policies off the books, all of that helps. We just need to do more and faster.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me seize the moment also to tip my hat to Councilman Green in tackling this labor-intensive task to take a laser beam look at all of the regulations and then figure out how we can streamline in a way that's appropriate. Do you agree, Mr. Epps, with Chairman Kenyatta Johnson's perspective that our Achilles heel could be our city's tax structure at the end of the road when Amazon makes its decision? Based on the submission, do you believe or do you think that we'll be told what may take us out of the running? Because we want to speak in the affirmative and see the glass is half full for as long as we can.
I cannot speculate on what Amazon will or will not tell us. They've been very, very protective about what they tell us and when they tell us, but I can only say that we're not sure exactly what their final decision-making criteria will be, but when we just do the analysis of what they put in the RFP, they had a category called incentives, they had a category called taxes. If you just compare us against the other 19 remaining municipalities, and you just did a scoring and rating,
Yes.
that's where we don't fare very well. But we don't know then, turn around and say, we don't know where that would be in the 7, 8, 9 different categories that they would prioritize. Again, if they prioritize location, affordability, talent, we will rank very high.
Okay.
We put Amazon aside. As we do the commerce work on a daily basis about retaining and recruiting businesses, we win our fair share, but when we lose, often it is because of our tax and the reputation that we carry about not being very business friendly. So we have data that tells us from others that businesses have not chosen to come here because of the tax structure and or because of our reputation of being non-business friendly.
Shift your thinking to business corridors, which are major engines for neighborhoods across the 10 councilmatic districts. Of the menu of taxes, which ones might you ID as most onerous for those small businesses on business corridors whose challenges are very different than your medium to large size business, and that's relative depending upon who you're talking to?
And for them, I would say it does not start with tax, it starts with complexity. It starts with how easy it is to get your business open, how easy it is to get alignment across our different departments of what the criteria are to stay open, the issues of enforcement, and then when it comes to tax, I would speculate it's probably BERT.
You would speculate it is?
BERT, business income receipts tax.
Okay.
But again, it starts with the work that we've been doing and the subcommittees that we formed already tell us that, and when we travel the world getting benchmark data, we are a complex city with a lot of regulatory requirements to get open, and then we have inconsistent and misaligned enforcement to stay open.
Last question. So given that reality that currently exists, what measures, what nuances or tweaks have you made in the Department of Commerce that directly affects that scenario you just articulated?
Well, what Commerce has done is initiate and lead the assembly of the forums and the tables and the task force to get at this. One department can't do it. It's L&I, it's health, it's revenue, it's commerce. we all have to be on the same page.
Okay.
Councilman Green, CEO Wonderland, and Director Epps, we lead this cross-functional task force that's got a lot of subcommittees that are making recommendations on a daily, weekly basis to get us more aligned, more simplified, and more competitive.
Okay.
And that's not more than a nuance and a tweak. Those are the kind of interventions that we believe will yield us outcomes. I'll give you one example. It takes us 3, 4, 5 months to get a business open where some other people can do it in 30 days.
I hear that often from contractors from Montgomery County, that the nightmare that they have to endure when they come downtown to our city agencies. Thank you very much for your testimony. And
businesses have a choice to make. That's the thing we always have to remember. You mentioned City Line Avenue. I can be on this side of the city line, and I got a 3.7% wage tax. On this side, I don't have one. Over here, I can get open in 30 days. Over here, it's going to take me 5 or 6 months.
Yes.
So which side do I choose to go to? The one that's going to get me in business faster.
Okay. Well, a year from now, we'll look to you and Councilman Green to hear about the enormous progress you've made in making life better for those businesses who want to do business.
That is our intent.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Epps. I think we had a really good conversation this morning that talked a lot about the ways in which we can take a look at a number of factors that are important to business attraction. So obviously there are different ways in which we categorize things. I personally see taxes as one aspect of it, but it is really important, as you know, in our city that as we look to attract jobs, we are a city that is the largest high poverty city in the country, that we want to make sure that we attract businesses and jobs without exacerbating poverty or rising income inequality at the same time. And we are certainly seeing that in Philadelphia right now, where we do see tremendous growth at the top and not so much at the base. And I think that there's been a lot of discussion that you and I had about the ways in which defining what makes a business-friendly environment can extend far beyond the things that directly touch business, like taxation and other types of things, but also matter a lot, for example, about public investments around our schools, in transit, the ability for employers to feel that they have a qualified workforce, that there's good infrastructure in our city that makes it attractive to their employees to not only work here, but to attract more here, and also to settle down and feel like they can raise a family. So you talked a little bit about that, but I was wondering if you could, you and I talked about that rather this morning, and I think you alluded to it, that workforce development, other types of things, investment in education are also very strong indicators of what makes a business-friendly environment. And we certainly know that poverty is a dissuader to a business-friendly environment. Income inequality is not a great attractor for businesses as well. So could you speak a little bit more to that and how you view that as we continue to talk about this issue?
So my view, again, having lived in 6 different states, some good, some bad, is that Philadelphia, after 40 years of decline, is on the rise as it relates to population and employment, 2 critical indicators, and the poverty number is not following suit. My belief, my perspective on that is because we've had decades of underinvestment in our education system. And as a result, we now have a high cost of what I'll call, this is the mayor's word, the misery index. So we have a disproportionate amount of our budget that goes into health and human services and areas that don't get you a return. So we've got to solve the education dilemma, and that will be a long-term investment. And in one of the graphs that's in my presentation that all of you have seen, or will see when I come visit, is that this correlation between 2- and 4-year degree attainment rate and poverty rate. The higher your degree attainment rate, the lower your poverty rate. And that's the biggest challenge Philadelphia faces. And the more we can solve that, the more we can get businesses to come to Philadelphia. We see it every day, that we get asked as much about talent and workforce as we do about taxes.
That's very helpful.
Okay? We get asked, so to me it's the T and the T. It's the talent and the taxes. But we should not let 2 years of positive trend, the last 2 years we've outpaced the national average in job growth, but that's still not an indicator for us to get lazy. We must improve the tax and business structure, and while we are seeing an uptick in revenue, we must invest in education such that, I'll just use my favorite reference, by the time we get to the semi-sesquicentennial 2026, that we've got a much better educated and trained workforce than we have today. And it's going to take us that long. But we need to make incremental gains every year in our talent while continuing to reduce the gap between us, particularly in our suburban counties, in our tax structure.
Thank you.
So you just touched on something. I'm gonna just make a brief statement. When you talk about the rise in talent, and then you see a correlation of poverty going down, and I would think that we would be forward thinking for the future, because we have some of the best eds and meds institutions in the region, if not the Eastern Seaboard. And so hopefully there'll be another conversation down the line on connecting that too. Because, I mean, again, that's the tale of two cities. And you got Penn, you got LaSalle, you got Temple, Philadelphia University, and at the same time, a lot of these institutions are within areas of high poverty, to be quite frank with you. But I like when you talk about the numbers shows the higher level of attainment of education, the lower the poverty rate goes. Chairman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commerce Director Epps, Commissioner Breslin, for your testimony. When I think about this issue, it makes me think, reflect on something personal. As we get more seasoned, as my father would say, and sometimes as we as adults, we look at ourselves in the mirror, we think we're still the same age or size we were when we were in undergrad. And as you go a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, you tend to add additional girth to your weight. But it didn't happen overnight. It happened over time. And so when you look at this issue in reference to taxes and you look at the history of taxation in the city of Philadelphia, we had certain taxes that were implemented and continue to grow over time. And so as a result, and because of the revenue needs we have as a city, the challenges that are occurring where we can't rely on the federal government or the Commonwealth for assistance, we have to make changes, and although sometimes we'll make those changes quickly, like some people who want to take a hydroxycut or some other type of quick diet pill to lose weight, that's not realistic, because what happens is that you get back to where you were in a short period of time. So I say that because I know we're making improvements on taxation, and we're doing some things, and we need to do more. I think some of the other challenges that we don't talk as much is the hard work. So when I, some years ago lost a significant amount of weight, part of that was because I get up early in the morning, 4:45 to run. So some of the things I look in our business climate is that, and you touched on this a little bit, and I want to get your thoughts on what we as a city can do. And when I say city, I'm talking not only the legislative branch, but also the executive branch. How can we make the process of doing business in a city easier? And I think it's somewhat human nature. If you tell someone that to get to this location, if you want to go from A to B, but you've got to go make a left here, then make a right, and then go 3 miles, and then go 2 steps, go over a bridge, your human reaction is to kind of step back. That's like very complicated, and you decide, well, I'll go a different route. And that's similar to what we have here in the city of Philadelphia. And I can talk from my own experience of not only representing small businesses, but actually having a small business and the challenges I had in just trying to get just a tax ID number and a tax account and all the challenges. And I can only imagine if you're a young person coming out of Holy Family or Lincoln University or Simon Gratz trying to start a business or Wharton, those challenges. So what type of steps can we take as a city to really drill down on the process or processes of starting a business or maintaining a business in the city of Philadelphia? Because I think that's the thing that's the real heavy work that we don't do. We have so many silos in the city of Philadelphia between, at times, well, this is a revenue issue versus this is a commerce issue versus this is a health department issue. And from an person that's outside of city government looking in, it's all the city. And, you know, I look at the city, I guess because I started my career as a banker from a small business perspective, I look at the city of Philadelphia, we are in the customer attraction and retention business. We need to retain constituents, retain businesses, and we need to attract constituents and attract businesses. And I think one of the things that I would like to see us going forward is having a real strategic, almost like a strike force, like you have in any type of health issue or military issue that can really get to the crux of why is it so hard for a business to get started in the city of Philadelphia, and also how it's so hard for a business to maintain itself in the city of Philadelphia, and how we can cut down some of those processes. So I'm curious on your thoughts. I know you don't have to answer today because it's not a quick answer, but I think that's something that we as a city really need to drill down, because that, to me, that's really the heavy lift. We continue to work on the tax policy, but the heavy lift is really how do we make it us more business friendly going forward.
So because of our legacy circumstance, my favorite comment would be this: we got to recognize that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Doesn't matter whether it's education, talent, or taxes. We got to look at this as a decade kind of initiative. I'll tell you a quick story. After I left the tax force, I served in the private sector for the last administration on the continuous improvement task force. After 2 years, we quit because we saw no action.
You saw that, I'm sorry?
We saw no action.
Right.
So the challenge that doesn't matter whether we're the legislative body or the executive body, we must realize that this is a long-term initiative. We must stay the course. And so I happen to, as Commerce Director, co-chair the Education and Workforce Task Force, co-chair with you and CEO Wonderling, the Tax Regulatory Task Force. And I can guarantee you, as long as I'm here, we will stick with it, because we don't have the ability to lose 20 pounds overnight. This guy right here to my left will tell you that I often say, we need to move faster, and he reminds me, I've still got to balance the budget. So we can only move at the pace that we can find the equation. I mean, but let me just answer your question this way. We need to evaluate, we need to streamline, we need to eliminate, and we need to automate. And the work that we're doing together will provide opportunities for all of those to take cost out as we go. But again, we won't go as fast as we'd like to go, because I don't think we'll be able to find the revenue in other places to make it up as fast.
And I understand that. That's part of the reason with the challenges with, if you reduce taxes, you're going to make it up.
You got to make it up.
And so you kind of, as the economy goes, and when we have a boom economy, you can do more from reduction.
We can take cost out.
Right. But I guess when I'm really want to drill down, I think just like we did with Amazon, and when we did the hearings that I held in the committee of the whole about the Amazon initiative, where everyone was on board, and that was kind of a moonshot approach. I think in this perspective it's kind of similar, that we need to identify a timeline and then devote resources in various departments to have people to meet on a regular basis to really get to the crux. And it doesn't have to be another commission, it doesn't have to be another initiative. It's more of just delving resources, and those who have the expertise and the background, especially at middle management level, they can say, these are the issues that I confront with every day, and how do we kind of drill down that stuff. And I think that's something where I think going forward we need to really devote resources from a human resource perspective to really focus on that. And then as we're doing that, we can then market and communicate to the business community, not just locally, but around the nation, around the world, of how we're making changes to our business climate to make us more business friendly going forward. Because that's what other cities have been doing. I know you're doing an initiative to do a better job of us as a city market to business communities about why Philadelphia is open for business, which is great, because we have not done that historically like we do in a hospitality perspective. But trying to really identify resource to really focus on the heavy lift, I think, is something that's important. I know we have a challenging budget structure, but things that are important, we find ways to get the resources.
So I agree 100%. The only thing that I would add to it is what we've learned is when we attempt to do that only internally, we sometimes miss the unintended consequences. So that is why the roundtables, the task force, the consortiums that include your customer is important. So when you make the change, you or they have helped you think through the consequences, but more importantly, the unintended ones that come out of the change that you make. Sometimes just internally you miss the bigger picture, but I completely agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Dow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking up, and by the way, thank you, Commissioner Breslin, Director Epps. You guys are doing a good job, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. I was just looking up our bond rating, just so you know. I think that Matt Stitt last year gave us a presentation on the 20 cities across the country, similar to Philadelphia, and where we stood on bond rating. And I think we were at 3 or 4 towards the bottom of the ratings on bond rating, so we were not that great. But I think the 3 issues that he focused on, or that the bond rating people focus on, number 1, of course, is the underfunding of our pensions. Number 2 is reserves, cash reserves. And I think Rob DeBoe's done a pretty good job in the last 6 months building up those reserves, which is good. And I think 3 is delinquencies, and I know you've addressed that. I want to have a few other items I just want to bring up and see what your thoughts are. But from my, only been here 2 years and 2 months.
Yeah, same
as you, yeah. Right. What I see is roughly we have a real estate inventory that was $1.3 billion of value last year, of which we billed $91 billion, because the rest is nonprofit. We don't bill it, almost a third. And that produced revenues of about $1.3 billion, of which the city gets 45%, and the school system gets 55%. That's where your numbers came from. But we don't get, we don't bill over 45 billion of real estate. Keep that in mind. So you have a store called the City of Philadelphia where 1 out of 3 customers come into the store and don't really pay for services. I'm just calling it the way it is. The only services they really pay for are wage taxes. There's no net profits, there's no BERT taxes, there's no real estate taxes, which is, I love eds and meds, I'm just telling you the way it is. So that's on one end of the spectrum. On the second end of the spectrum, you have a city that has 26% or 25.7% of our population in poverty, which is, you said, is a big strain on the budget. So you have these 2 things pulling us, and one of the problems is that the business community and individuals get caught in the middle of that, and that's why the tax structure probably is the way it is. And the only way to really get out of that, we want to encourage more eds and meds, but we need to take people out of poverty, number 1, and bring in more people and expand the base. But otherwise, we're going to be in the same situation. Having said that, though, there's a lot of positive things that are going on that I would like to see us promote more than we are. One of them was, which I love this fact, this Innovation Magazine, I mentioned at Council on Thursday, we moved as a city to number 3 in the country, up 5 notches in the tech startup world. Only Boston and San Francisco are ahead of us. We're number 3. It's amazing, amazing. We were 8 a year ago. We're now number 3. We should be promoting that. I think I've been told that we're either 1 or 2 for cancer research in the country. Amazing. We need to promote those things. You know, a lot of businesses are successful because they promote. City's got to do the same thing. We have to promote more. We should spend more money and more for marketing the city. We've had come off 4 big events. Every one of them, no issues. It's amazing. DNC, right? I think there was the Pope, Super Bowl, right? And the NFL draft.
We're playing that one too.
Yeah, yeah. So, and the city did a great job. And then the millennials that have moved here in the last 10 years, 100,000 of them. We're killing it with that. I think in the last 12 months we had the highest percentage of millennials move here. But one of the statistics that I like the best is that non-native college graduates, I think it was 12 to 14 years ago, meaning parents not from this area, 24% who went to college stayed here. At the time, Boston had 49%. They were killing us. We wrote articles about what we call the brain drain. We would educate them and they would leave. Today, Boston's, I think, 51%. I just saw the statistic that we are 67%.
Right.
That's amazing. So, I mean, I don't think we're promoting these things, but I think we need to promote more because that will attract more business. And I'm not sure it's from commerce or where it comes from or you need more money for it, but that's an investment that we should make. On the issue with poverty, you know, this took a long time for us to get to this level, and I agree 100% with what you said. We're not going to get out of it overnight. It's going to be a long haul. I'm just a big believer in making sure we teach financial literacy from kindergarten through 12th grade. Every class, we must teach financial literacy. You're not going to break that cycle. and technology, K through 12. Dr. Height tells me 91% of our kids in public school have one parent, and 88% are in poverty in the public schools. So financial literacy and tech. On the last piece, I just want to mention Councilman Green. Your dad is absolutely right. I will say that on the subject of girth, okay, I wrestled in high school at 157. I think I've added a full body since that time. Anyway, thank you for being here and thank you for listening.
If I may, can I respond to Councilman Dom about the marketing piece? So, again, a 10-year perspective. Since I didn't go to high school here, I guess I'll never be a real Philadelphia. But anyway, I call it home anyway. This whole notion of the Quaker stated environment, I think, is one of the reasons that we don't have a history of promoting ourselves, contrary to the other place I used to live called Boston, where they think highly of themselves. But all that being aside, we, out of commerce, are leading that initiative. The Amazon proposal reinforced our need to get even more aggressive about telling our story and marketing. And so we have another group of people around the table, all the externally facing people, led by my Chief of Staff, Sylvia Gallier-Howard, that is developing the strategy to elevate the branding and marketing of the city and the issues around tech, the issues around cancer research, and all the other unique assets of Philadelphia will be highlighted in the new marketing strategy that will unfold itself between now and the end of June. So we're again working on it because we fully recognize its importance.
Point of information, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to that narrative because we really do need to change our narrative and how we celebrate this city.
Absolutely.
And we, all of us, have a say and a stake in that.
You know the marketing campaign from 30 years ago in Philadelphia?
Please.
Philadelphia is not as bad as Philadelphia says it is. That was the city's motto.
There you go. Councilman.
Hey, I didn't make that up. I got a T-shirt that says it.
Councilman Dom, where does Boston stack with regards to their menu of taxes?
You will hear that later. One of the panels will report
all right,
out
because when
on
I
it.
hear the fact that more millennials have come and stayed here than Boston, forgive me?
It's affordability.
Affordability.
It's affordability.
The follow-up question for me is, and so what is the tax structure as it relates to Philadelphia, comparative to Philadelphia?
What is
better,
it? It's better, and one of the panels will walk you through. It's better. That's kind of the embarrassing. Again, I spent a third of my life in Boston, and as expensive as that city is, it's embarrassing that our tax structure would be more expensive than Boston's.
Okay, all right then.
But its housing cost is out through the boom.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you both.
Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Councilman Dom, for your comments. I definitely agree with you on the marketing aspect. As I was saying earlier, something that I've been pushing for some time. I truly believe in the phrase that a friend of mine who used to work for P&G used to say, perception is reality. And so from the perspective of the initiative that you're working on from a marketing perspective, in this upcoming budget, are there any dollars associated with that proposal or initiative that we're talking about in the budget coming up?
We have proposed some, yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I think that's something, because if you go look, you look at, and I had this conversation with Merrill Levitz before I even got sworn in, is that when GPTMC, which I'll still use that acronym because it took me 10 years to be able to say it properly, which is now Visit Philadelphia, when they got started over 25 years ago, we really didn't have any type of hospitality perspective in the city of Philadelphia. And if you look at our room rental rates, to be able to have a Philadelphia Hospitality Improvement Levy that we have now to go after these large initiatives in the city, we would not have been able to have that but for organizations like GPTMC and the Convention and Business Bureau being able to work collectively together to really market the city. And so the same perspective on the business side, I'm glad you're saying that we'll have some dollars in the budget or some proposal to go forward with that, because that perception is reality, and as all these millennials, they see the city of Philadelphia, they hear about what's going on, that helps. We have to prime the pump and continue that perception to truly make it a reality going forward, which ultimately will impact our general fund and poverty.
Using the Northeast Amtrak corridor as your reference point, Philadelphia, asset-wise and cost-wise, has a great advantage over DC, New York, and Boston. We must seize the moment. This is our time, and we must make sure we've got the taxes and the talent and the business environment to seize it. And basically what we're here today to say is we must continue the journey. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Going in the right direction, not fast enough, and we all must be rowing together. The other thing we learned about the Amazon proposal is we got such a great outcome because we all worked together.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Can the clerk please call the next panel, please?
Jeff Hornstein, Robert Inman, and Mark Steer.
Just please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Hornstein, the Executive Director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia. Good afternoon. By the way, for the record, our bond rating is A+ in most categories right now, which is pretty good, but not great. It's investment grade, but well above junk. Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, other members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. As I said, I'm Jeff Hornstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Economy League, we're a 109-year-old nonprofit civic leadership organization that produces impactful research and insight, convenes cross-sector leaders, and serves as a civic incubator to devise shared solutions to our region's challenges. And our real wheelhouses are education and talent development, business growth and job creation, and infrastructure. So those are the places where we've developed a deep bench of expertise. Couple caveats. I've been at the Economy League for exactly 3 weeks. The Economy League has also not done research on tax policy issues for a few years, but has a long history of insight into tax policy. However, as many of you know, I ran the Controller's Policy Unit for 5 years, so much of what I'm going to say today comes from work done in those years and should not be considered the official position of the Economy League. That's a disclaimer. That said, our organization has a highly skilled team of analysts who are at this council's disposal, so my purpose today is to raise a few questions that can be further pursued. As I like to say, Philadelphia has 4 core challenges: jobs, 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 and schools, obviously interdependent. The real question, in my mind, is what role tax policy plays in addressing those challenges. So my key points today, and I'm not going to read this whole thing. Number 1, tax policy is not the primary driver of economic growth or business locations decisions. As you can see in the slides that we put together, the primary reason for domestic relocation, taxes are pretty far down in every survey of corporations. Within the region, it's likely more of a factor, but it's not the primary driver. As worker preferences shift towards a more amenity-rich, easily accessible workplaces, Philadelphia has a compelling value proposition. I think that's what Harold was just getting at, that at least partially offsets its higher tax burden compared to suburban locations. We've seen this manifest itself with Vanguard and Bentley's opening gateway offices in the city. They want access to talent, and talent wants to be in places like Center City and University City. That's why, as Councilman Dom said, we've led the nation in millennial attraction, right? Talent wants to be here. It's amazing to me, having gone to college in the Boston area and graduate school here, that now we are outperforming Boston in terms of college student retention. To give a little plug to my organization, in the past, the organization that became Campus Philly was sort of incubated in the Economy League. Second point I want to make is that the tax burden for Philadelphia residents is relatively high compared with peer metros and is not a plus in talent attraction for our increasingly knowledge-based economy. So we come in at about fourth for a family of earning $100,000 a year. So that's an important point. Third, and very relevant to the real meat of what I want to say, is that for low-income Philadelphians, the household tax burden is among the most regressive nationally. So if you look at our third slide, a family earning $25,000 per year, Philadelphia is far and away #1 in terms of tax burden, which keeps people in poverty. The volatility of our revenue streams, as I think we all know, dependent largely on wages, business profits, and consumption, presents significant future risk during our next economic slowdown. I was at an event this morning with some economists, and people see growth for the next few years, but everyone knows recession has got to happen at some point. We have essentially no reserve funds and a looming school district budget crisis. So those are things we have to prepare for. There are many ideas to address some of these shortcomings. But again, despite our well-known tax structure issues, the city is adding jobs and growing. So on the plus side, we've seen job growth in the past decade. We're over 700,000 jobs for the first time since the 80s. Population's up, school performance is trending positively, but there really are 2 or maybe 3 different Philadelphias. On the one hand is the growing dynamic core from the Delaware River to 40th Street, Girard to Tasker, which we might call Boston-Adelphia, and hopefully one day Boston will be calling its growing pieces Phila-Boston or something. In this part of town, educational attainment is high, unemployment is very low, incomes are high, property values, and thus wealth, and that's important, are steadily rising. In some, life is good. In Boston-Adelphia, it's Paris at half the cost. In this part of the city, especially on its edges, people worry about gentrification, about the rising cost of housing forcing historic residents from their homes. But the much larger part of our population lives in what we might call Detroit-Adelphia, where job growth is anemic, educational attainment is low, the unemployment rate is high, labor force participation, a very important indicator, is low, particularly for those with barriers to entry into the labor market, incomes are low and flat, and property values, and therefore wealth, are actually declining in real terms. In this part of the city, what we might call degentrification is a much bigger threat than gentrification. And as many of you know, I worked for SEIU, the janitors union, for many years, and the typical member of SEIU owns a home in a degentrifying neighborhood where a home purchased for $50,000 25 years ago is still worth $50,000 or less today. So degentrification, lots of causes, federal policy, massive disinvestment in low-income neighborhoods, particularly those populated by people of color, has destroyed billions of dollars of wealth and working class and minority wealth. But I digress. For the better part of 2 decades, we have focused on macro factors like tax policy. Some have argued that but for the wage tax, we'd have tens of thousands of additional jobs. Others have argued that but for the BERT, we'd have tens of thousands of additional jobs. Maybe. But despite our anomalous and uncompetitive tax structure, Philadelphia is growing. We've cut the wage tax responsibly in the past decade. We've almost fixed our broken property tax assessment system, and we've exempted the first $100,000 of business income from BERT. In my view, before we go further with so-called tax reform, we ought to do a deep dive into the impact of these changes. So to put my cards on the table, I'm not one who believes that tax policy is a panacea. I personally think that micro-strategies, the workforce strategies like the one the city unveiled last week, in which the Economy League played a role, or the one announced by University City District and University City Science Center last week, or growth strategies designed to leverage the purchasing power of our eds and meds institutions, to speak to the chairman's point about our eds and meds institutions being these islands of prosperity and seas of poverty, and to Councilman Dom's point about the eds and meds institutions not paying certain types of taxes. Harold Epps and I have designed this thing called the Anchor Procurement Initiative to get these institutions to localize more of their procurement dollars to create jobs for people in the neighborhoods, and the Economy League is now taking that project over. We're going to officially launch in the very near future with support from these institutions. And these are, in my mind, better targeted to address the very real structural inequities in our economy than tax policy changes. That said, there has been a healthy debate over the past decade about which components of our tax structure are holding back faster growth. Would we indeed have tens of thousands of new jobs if we'd only lowered the wage tax faster and more dramatically? Would business growth have been more robust? Would we have retained more startups if we'd aggressively lowered one component or another, BERT? These questions have surely provided fodder for a cottage industry of econometric modelers for quite some time. I'd say this, for the record, absolute tax rates matter much less than relative ones, relative to contiguous jurisdictions in our metro, relative to peer cities. By these measures, Philadelphia's tax structure has gotten more competitive, partly because the metro's raised taxes as we've lowered them. So, our tax mix has 3 fundamental problems. It's heavily dependent on volatile revenue streams. It's anomalous and uncompetitive both regionally and nationally. None of our peer cities tax the way we do, and our tax rates are generally higher than our nearest neighbors. However, the tax gap is shrinking. and it's regressive. That is, its burdens fall on entities regardless of their ability to pay, partly a Pennsylvania problem since we're a flat tax state, but partly due to the types of taxes we rely on. Thus, while our economy is built on a pretty stable base at the moment, eds, meds, and beds, in Merrill Levitz's favorite phrase, our tax structure is not. It depends on a highly volatile revenue streams. But with an eds and meds base, we can count on some steady level of wage tax, which is why I've never actually thought as much of a job killer as some of my peers. Our great hospitals and universities are going to attract top talent, and the 4% wage tax levied on these highly paid individuals is more than offset by the great value proposition that is contemporary Philadelphia. Penn competes with talent for Princeton, Harvard, and Columbia, all in places where the overall tax burden and cost of living is much higher. So, to say BERT is a drag on growth, I don't think anyone doubts that. More specifically, I think the evidence suggests the net income side of BERT is the core problem. Once Penn or Jefferson or Drexel postdocs or faculty decide to commercialize their research, they have strong financial incentives to move the company across city line as soon as it gets profitable and is subject to our highly anomalous and steep 6.4% corporate income tax. I have personal stories I could tell about that. You know, and we've created all these fixes to try and avoid that. We've created our own little Cayman Islands, Keystone Opportunity Zones, which are useful, but they are a symptom of a problem. So, again, we have no rainy day fund. We have a looming school district crisis. So we need to be responsible with how we deal with our tax issues. You know, some have argued that really incremental change isn't going to really make the difference. That may be so, but major change is also going to put us in a hole that's too deep for us to dig out of anytime quickly. So we could talk about fixes, but I would say that the city is growing, it is adding jobs. I've never believed that tax policy is a panacea, and there are other strategies for jobs and growth, and I'm proud that the city is actually starting to take these strategies very seriously. Workforce strategy, anchor procurement stuff, business development programs like those at the Enterprise Center and many others in this city, the business attraction strategies pursued by the smart folks at Commerce and PIDC. I think, you know, we're moving in the right direction. We all need to row in the right direction, and I echo what Harold said, that this Amazon bid led by Sylvie and Ann Nevins and a lot of other really smart people has made the city kind of realize that everyone has to row in the right direction. So these are all relatively kind of high-level thoughts based on years working on and thinking about city tax policy. The Economy League is happy to work with council to perform any sort of work you need in this arena. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Hi, thank you. Is this working? My name is Bob Inman. I'm a professor at the Wharton School.
Bring the microphone a little closer to you, please.
Oh, surely. Is that better?
Yes.
My name is Bob Inman. I'm a professor in the finance department and the economics department at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. It was a treat for me to see Harold Epps after 6 or 7 years. I was one of the members of the Tax Commission, and will certainly echo his conclusions from that commission. And I too am delighted that the direction that the city's been pursuing over the last 7 or 8 years has been consistent with the recommendations of the commission. I'm not sure my comments have been shared with you, as I had a little outline. I'm not sure you have that. Very, very simply, what I'd like to do is stress 3 things generally about tax policy, and then apply those principles, if I could, to the Philadelphia setting, and give you perhaps a sense of where we stand against the backdrop of economic performance as evaluated by economists more generally. I'll begin by saying what I think we all know is that the city of Philadelphia nationally and both regionally is one of the highest tax locations in the area. So competitively, this is a big issue for us. But I'm also very sensitive to the comments that have been made earlier about the fact that not only do we need to think about our revenue side, but we need to think about our service side. And it will be a balancing act that we'll have to play. I take to heart Councilman Green's comment about wanting to be attractive to customers, and in some ways what the economists will do with tax policy is to turn it in the price of coming into the city. Think of it as an entry fee, if you will, for coming into the city. And what you'd like to do is have low costs and high quality services. And the side of the equation that I'm going to talk about will be the cost side, the tax side. So principle number one, which I think is the obvious one, is there, alas, no perfect tax. Every tax is going to have a consequence, whether it's a tax on property, a tax on jobs, a tax on sales. It will have implications for how individuals, businesses, and families make their decisions. And so the question is how much do these decisions change ultimately in response to the tax? Households and consumers, we're going to be interested in what happens as we tax them, what happens to their consumption, particularly their housing consumption when we look at the property tax, and their work decisions. So these will be the focus for taxes on families. When you tax businesses, there'll be two big implications. First off, how do they make their decisions on hiring people and investing? And then the second big decision is, do I want to be here or not be here? And businesses clearly have that choice. I do agree with the comment made by my colleague earlier about the fact that in comparing cities against Chicago versus Philadelphia, Baltimore versus Philadelphia, taxes won't be on the top of the list. What firms are going to be looking at is access to quality of labor. Can I move my goods and services quickly? What's the highway, indeed Amazon's stress on the transit network, I think will be the main things. But once the decision is to move into a region, and by region, I would move us and think about this from a firm point of view as the East Coast corridor. We're competing against Washington, D.C., Baltimore, New York City, and to some degree Boston, particularly on the meds and eds front. So a region is not just from a resident point of view, clearly will be the 5-county and New Jersey regions, but from the point of view of firms, I think we want to think of the East Coast corridor as really our competitive alternatives. And there actually we rank pretty poorly. In terms of our tax rates compared to others. So the question is, how can we adjust this tax system? Clearly we don't want to drive it down on business, drive it to zero, because the consequences for services are going to be significant. We're trying to balance the costs and the benefits. So what I'd like to do is give you a sense at least of what economists have said about the relative costs of using different taxes. And the top of the list in terms of the one that an economist would feel is the most damaging to the performance of the business side of the equation will be the non-resident wage tax. What this tax does effectively is gets shifted back onto labor. And the cost of labor for businesses. So if I'm going to tax a worker who has a suburban alternative, that worker is going to say to me, why should I work for you when I can work in the suburbs and not pay the differential wage tax? And so in the case of the 3.4% residential wage tax, and interesting, if you look at a map and ask the question, what suburbs have an income tax? They're not next to Philadelphia. Because obviously that gives them a competitive advantage not to have that tax. And so, you know, if you had an offset, I pay the Philadelphia non-resident tax, well, I'd get a 1% relief if my suburban community had a 1% income tax. So they're not going to do that. So what you do is you really do see the incentive effects of the non-resident tax here pretty directly. And it's ultimately borne by the labor costs of the firm. And so what that does, of course, if labor is 60–70% of the cost of a business, and particularly service businesses, then you're really going to drive up your costs, that's going to reduce your profits, and it's going to make the location in the city much less attractive. So my work on the impact of the wage tax, and in particular the non-resident wage tax, suggests it's been one of the main drivers over the years for the loss of our jobs. Happily, we've been lowering it, and that's been, I think, an important source of at least our ability to compete and in some sense also increase our job performance recently. So the worst of the list is the non-resident wage tax. If you wanted to put a price tag on that, and I won't bore you with the details, it would be for every dollar you raise, you basically lose 36 cents in profits, jobs, and economic activity within the city. So if you thought of the price, you're going to be paying $1.36 for a dollar of revenue with that particular tax. Next in the list are going to be property taxes on new construction. This is a very elastic decision. Do I bring my household, or do I bring my construction activities into the city or go to the suburbs? And there the property tax will have a fairly strong effect. And so if I were going to put a marginal price on that, it would be on the order of $1.20 to $1.25 for raising $1 of revenue. Next in the list is the gross receipts tax. It is particularly damaging for new firms because it's a tax on revenues or cash flow, not a tax on profits. And so you've got a startup company that's trying to put it together, has good cash flow, but no profits just yet. They're still going to pay this tax. So one of the drivers of, and one of the big disadvantages for new firms in the city of Philadelphia is the gross receipts tax. And I estimate the marginal cost of that is around 20 cents on the dollar. So if I raise $1, I've cost essentially the economy $1.20 in that regard. We move into the better taxes. The retail sales tax is not that bad. It's around 7 cents on the dollar. The tax that indeed was the foundation for the recommendations that Mr. Epps mentioned with regard to the Tax Commission's recommendations to raise the property and lower the wage. The property tax on existing property is pretty good. Because families will indeed make decisions maybe to postpone repairs, but they're not making the decision to build or not build. Firms will make decisions to postpone repairs, but not the decision to build or not build. And the cost there is around 10 cents on the dollar. The best of the bunch is the resident wage tax in terms of its economic consequence, because residents are here. The decision that they're altering is their labor decision, and most people are going to work. So that's not going to have a big effect. I do want to emphasize this point, though, that residents are going to pay, it turns out the costs are about $1.05. So they're going to pay $1.05, but you better give them back $1.05 or better in benefits. Otherwise, they will relocate. So that's the benefit cost comparisons that families are going to be doing, and that'll get to the points that we've been talking about quality of schools and quality of services. So all of this in the mix, I think, is important. I think where I come down is I want to move towards those taxes that have low costs per dollar raised, and that for me would be moving away from the non-resident tax and the taxes on new property and towards things, and the gross receipts, and towards a resident tax on existing property. Not always possible to make these distinctions, but on existing property and on resident taxes. That would be my move in the mix. When I teach this stuff to students, they typically, I give them all the numbers, and of course they sort of dutifully write them down and then forget them. And I want them to leave the class with remembering something that maybe will stick with them. And for me, the message is resident taxes for resident services, business taxes for business services. And what that approximates is a benefit principle. So if I'm a resident and I pay a tax, I want to see benefits as compensation. If I'm a business, I want to pay a tax and see benefits as compensation. And so I want to link my taxes as closely as possible. My resident taxes to quality of education, my business taxes to the provision of business services. That kind of tying, I think, is going to really help us in a competitive environment. I'm quite supportive of this proposal that's now before the state legislature, the Levy-Sweeney proposal on being able to separate the resident and commercial property taxes. I think it'll give us another degree of freedom in being able to design a competitive tax structure. I'll make just one very fast, quick ending comment. Fairness is important, and I think the assessment initiative, the AVI initiative, was a big step in the right direction. I think we want to have broad-based taxes rather than targeting particular things, and uniform tax rates. I think it's very difficult for a city to have progressive taxes, as New York City is finding out at this moment. progressive taxes by cities is really not an economically feasible strategy. But uniform rates, I think, is certainly feasible. And my recommendations, I think, would be from a competitive point of view with respect to business, is the non-resident gross receipts and towards property taxation, and with the splitting, leave it to you to make this difficult balancing act that will involve both jobs and efficiency, but also fairness as well.
Now, were your students the ones who submitted the presentation for Amazon? And your students participate in the mock?
Yes, they did, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, they suggested we give Amazon $1 billion tax break.
No, I wasn't in favor. That was not my favorite proposal. You were there, actually, weren't you? Yeah. Can I just say, maybe off the record, that was the MBAs, not the undergraduates who were making that suggestion.
My good friend Mark Steer, go ahead, Mark. Please state your name and your title for the record, please.
I'm Mark Steer. I'm the director of the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. Councilman Johnson, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. There's much to be said, both positive and negative, about the Tax Reform Commission and its recommendations and their implementation, but I want to focus on the central thrust of those recommendations, which was a proposal to make Philadelphia's tax structure normal. That is, to make a radical change in its historical tax system in which relatively more revenue comes from wage and business taxes and relatively less from property taxes than other large cities. The Commission argued for substantial cuts to what was then called the gross receipts tax and the wage tax, and held that economic, job, and wage growth generated by those cuts would lead to higher property values, and if property tax rates were not reduced, higher property tax revenues, with the result that city revenues as a sum would be higher. The Commission came into existence at a moment in our political history when its recommendations were pretty much conventional wisdom. And that conventional wisdom was reinforced because there really weren't clear alternatives being presented at that time to how to create economic growth and job creation in the city. Indeed, for most of my 21 years living in Philadelphia, the voice who blamed our taxes for wage and job loss were not answered by a clear alternative. That conventional wisdom took hold even though there were people, including my predecessor at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center and the Keystone Research Center, who point out at the time that the arguments for the Commission's proposals were somewhat flawed. First, we pointed to an enormous body of empirical evidence that casts doubt on the impact of relatively small variations in tax policy on the decisions of businesses to locate in one jurisdiction or another. This conclusion may seem counterintuitive, as just everyone seems to know that taxes are really important in the decisions of business people. Yet that intuitive conclusion forgets some key features of economic life that once one stops and thinks about it should also seem intuitive. Taxes are a cost of doing business. Businesses pay some taxes no matter where they locate, but for most businesses, taxes are a much smaller cost of doing business than labor costs, and for manufacturers, the cost of raw materials and energy. The best research we have suggests that all state and local taxes together account for only 1.9% of total business costs. That's not nothing, but it's not an overwhelming factor. Second, we point out 15 years ago that the econometric studies most often cited in support of cutting wage and business taxes were flawed. Stephen Herzenberg, then and now the executive director of the Keystone Research Center, wrote in 2002, "The flaw is that in seeking to explain what drives changes in the tax base, Econsult and others do not consider any other factors besides tax changes that might be expected to impact the tax base. If these excluded factors are correlated with changes in taxes, excluding them from the model can result in tax changes appearing to have a bigger impact than they actually do." There's really no reason to doubt that many of these factors affected Philadelphia's economic growth during the time that wage and business taxes were increasing. Some of them were Philadelphia specific, including Philadelphia's greater dependence on manufacturing jobs relative to other cities, the racial strife in our city, the historically high rate of crime in Philadelphia compared to other cities. Other were general and affected urban areas to one degree or another, including redlining in black neighborhoods, white flight from cities, the decline of federal investment in cities, and the rise of investment in suburbs. All these factors, and no doubt others, helped to create a cultural mood in America that held up suburban life as an ideal. That ideal itself became a further barrier to economic growth in cities like Philadelphia in the 60s and 70s and 80s. In recent years, however, that ideal has become overcome by another cultural shift, especially among millennials and retiring baby boomers. Councilman Dom pointed to some of the evidence a few minutes ago. The arts, culture, restaurants, and streetscapes of our cities have taken on a whole new appeal. And all the attractions of urban life have been multiplied as the population of our urban areas, including Center City and nearby neighborhoods, take off. Now, there's an underlying economic basis to this new trend. In the growing fields of healthcare, education, and technology, personal interaction is extremely important, and that's made cities economically more attractive, and that in turn has created a whole new cultural mood about cities. That Philadelphia has been growing much faster in recent years, despite relatively small changes in taxes, suggests that the role taxes play has always been overestimated, and that these cultural factors and material economic factors based on technology have been far more important. To these 2 points we made 15 years ago, I want to add 3 more quickly today. One is that there's some reason to believe that the proponents of making Philadelphia's tax structure more normal may have had it totally backwards. To the extent that taxes play a role in stimulating or stifling job growth, Philadelphia's relatively low property values, property tax, and housing costs may be an advantage, not a disadvantage. This is true for 2 reasons. First, property taxes are likely to be as great or greater burden on economic development than business taxes or wage taxes. After all, new businesses may, as Ms. Drainer pointed out, not pay profits tax. They do pay the gross receipts tax, but they also pay property taxes, whether they're profitable or not. This claim is supported by a fascinating report last year by Michael Mazurov and Michael Leachman of the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, which reached 2 key conclusions about the source of new jobs. The vast majority of jobs are created by businesses that start up or are already present in a state or locality, not by the relocation or branching into a state or locality by out-of-state firms. And during periods of healthy economic growth, startups and young, fast-growing companies are responsible for most jobs. What we need to do is make Philadelphia an attractive place for startups and new businesses and worry much less about whether people want to move into the city. Rather, existing businesses want to move into the city. And property tax rates are very important in those decisions because, again, those are taxes that businesses pay whether they're making profits or not. Not only do low property values and taxes contribute directly to job growth, they also account for one of the other widely recognized factors that makes Philadelphia an attractive place to live, especially for millennials who we've heard have been coming here in large numbers and staying here. And that's the lower cost of housing than in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. It may be that Philadelphia's unique tax structure, which many have blamed for the decline in manufacturing and other jobs, turned out to make our city well-suited for taking advantage of the cultural and economic shift back to the cities. It would be a terrible irony of history if at this moment a continuing effort to cut wage and business taxes and raise property tax revenues undermined rather than stimulated economic growth in the city. Another point I want to make that's new is that any consideration of tax policy should pay more attention to distributional effects than the Tax Reform Commission did. The shift from wage and business taxes to property taxes was sometimes pointed out by some people to have a negative distributional effect in that it would harm low-income families more than high-income families. I don't know that anyone's ever really studied this in detail, but as we rethink the Tax Reform Commission's recommendations, I think it's something that needs to be considered. This whole idea of shifting our taxes to make Philadelphia may look more normal may actually hurt our low-income residents in a very unfortunate way. Finally, I want to make a last point to which I cannot do justice today, but simply that we have a lot of alternatives to economic growth strategy and job creation strategy that weren't on the table 15 years ago. Councilman Green's been very aggressive in pointing out to the complexity of starting a business here and addressing those. That's an important strategy. The procurement strategy Jeff Hornstein talked about is really important. I think Mayor Kenny and Council has been recognizing probably the most important long-term growth strategy for the city, which is to invest in pre-K and K-12 education. While the research that attributes variations in economic growth to small changes in taxes is not that strong, the research that points to the close connection between levels of public investment in education and economic growth, in fact, is very strong. Another economic development strategy we ought to be considering and adopting here to a greater extent is investing more in our lagging commercial corridors. This strategy, which New York used to great effect, recognizes that there's a lot of buying power even in low-income communities, but many of our commercial corridors are still suffering from disinvestment that took place decades ago. A targeted strategy of commercial corridor rehabilitation, business recruitment, and opening of government offices might create more vibrant commercial corridors and the jobs that go along with them. And finally, I want to briefly mention one final point, and that is to take advantage of this moment in the history when our city is becoming so much more attractive and we see residential construction in so many neighborhoods, to revisit our zoning code and carefully allow for much higher density and higher building in selected neighborhoods. Higher density development would have a number of beneficial effects in the city. It would keep housing costs from spiraling, even as property values and property taxes continue to increase. If combined with inclusionary zoning policies that condition higher density development on the provision of affordable housing, it would address the gentrification problems we see in many neighborhoods. It would increase the demand for public transit, which would not only help keep SEPTA stable, but might even allow SEPTA to expand in certain areas. And if local neighborhoods were allowed to benefit from some of the increased tax revenues that came along with higher density development, it could provide much needed public amenities in many parts of the city where that higher density development took place. This is a long subject, as a professor of mine used to say, and I can't go into in detail here, but we will be putting out a paper in the next month or two that addresses this strategy of using high density development and building Philadelphia up as a way to generate more jobs and more economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm going to pass the microphone along to my two colleagues. I just wanted to say one brief thing, and I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you regarding building up in terms of the density. And I heard you say selected neighborhoods, right? Because oftentimes, zoning up, the consequence, which it could be positive, but also, again, I'm a lifelong Point Breeze resident. The unintended consequences, you totally remove the people who always live in a particular neighborhood because they can't pay the property taxes. But I did hear you curve and say, if the revenue from the zoning up development project could be put back into the actual community to kind of help stabilize the neighborhood, you can have a mixture of individuals who always lived in the neighborhood with new residents and also maintaining the actual, I call it neighborhood culture of the neighborhood to kind of keep the diversity there. I think it would benefit everyone, but I would love to have that continued conversation, because that's kind of like the crux of my existence with the changing district, which I welcome, but nevertheless is one of those key areas that we try to find ways in terms of inclusionary housing and different ways around public policy to help people stay inside their homes, but also welcome the new development that comes along with it. So,
can I just?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, I've gentrification is an issue that's long concerned me, and I've walked neighborhoods and talked to folks in gentrifying neighborhoods, and people always said, I don't mind new people coming in, I just want to be able to take advantage of the new development. And I think allowing some upzoning, increased density, but directing those revenues back to community amenities and maybe even some kind of homestead provisions to keep taxes lower for the people who've been living in those communities could be a win-win for everyone.
Yes. Part of the issue is we can't use TIFs here to the extent that they are used in other cities, which would allow us to do that.
I want to thank you all for your very informative testimony and let you know how much I respect your knowledge around this issue. Dr. Inman, you've been a real think tank for council for many, many years around the issue of taxes, and know that I appreciate that as well. My office has leaned on you in the past for the few tax measures we've put forth. I was struck by your statement that it's helpful or it's useful when the resident tax has resident benefits and when the business tax has business benefits. Can you speak to or ID a municipality that actually gets this right?
Can I give you a specific city that does it? No. Can I give you what would work for me? I think, for example, the resident wage tax and the resident property tax tied to the quality of the educational package and the resident-specific services is something that ought to be sought directly. I'm quite attracted to the proposal that was just offered about high density. What one could do with a proposal like that is think of a land tax. Because the high density comes in, the value of the property goes up, tax the incremental increase in property. It won't affect the final development, but it will be resources available for the community and the neighborhood if that's where you choose to spend them. So, you know, the combination of a high density development, a targeted land tax, a TIF, and your choice as to how the funds get allocated, but reallocated to the neighborhood. Homestead exemption is all a package that could be very attractive. On the business side, I'm a big fan of user fees.
A big fan of
user fees.
User fees.
So a firm locates and the firm is using trash, charge them for the trash pickup service. A firm locates and the firm needs, say, extra police services, charge them for the extra police services. In other words, try as carefully as you can to charge the business for the specific services that the business is using. Clearly we do that with water and such. The tough ones are the employees of the business use the city roads and drive in. What do you do about that? I like garage taxes, for example.
Garage taxes?
Garage taxes for folks who are driving into the city for business. That certainly is a strategy that can begin to tie benefits more directly to tax revenues. You're still going to have general taxes, but I think the Levy-Sweeney proposal gives you the flexibility to target the tax structure to the business side as separate from the residential side. And exactly how you do that, I think, is, again, conditional. There is the issue and the controversy about the $1 billion subsidy to Amazon. I'm not in favor of that. But tax abatement strategies on particular attractive business opportunities is certainly something that I don't personally have objection to. Tax abatement strategies for each and every property I think is sort of nutty and very confusing, but I think certainly targeted tax strategies for projects that look really attractive. And I would stress this, projects that have widespread benefits, what economists call agglomeration benefits. So if the project is attractive but then helps stimulate businesses around it, that's a real plus. And the neighborhood procurement, Procure Philadelphia kind of strategy, I think is very attractive as well.
Wow. Thank you very, very much for that Cliff Note version on taxes. One follow-up. I will be curious to hear the leaders in the parking industry around your idea of a garage tax. And now I can't find my other question. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilwoman Gill.
Thank you very much. First of all, Professor Inman, it's been a pleasure to see you. I was a student in one of your classes back at Penn back in the day for a while, so it's always great to see you and appreciate the wisdom that you brought in. I'm also, struck by some of your testimony. I think that the councilwoman alluded to it as well, by the idea that business and residential life are somehow separated. And I think that, you get a little bit to the complexity of that when you talk about what if we were to eliminate the non-resident wage tax structure, that would then push us towards a user fee. But then when you start to think about the ways in which businesses actually use our city, including transit, they certainly rely on our school system to educate their future employees and labor. They will more than likely hang out at a park for lunch and utilize that. That crime matters, public safety, and the use of fire department and our city services, it becomes almost impossible to really flesh out the idea that somehow residence and business life is separated. So I'm wondering, about teasing that out at some point.
Sure.
We have some great people in this room, in particular, who are business leaders who are devoted to the quality of residential life in the city of Philadelphia, and I think that they recognize how, while we can have a healthy debate about the ways in which taxation can be burdensome on one end, its benefits cannot, that the benefits of it cannot be separated from the cost of it. So as well, I think you understand that as well, but it's in part why I was questioning a little bit your number on the non-resident wage tax of a 1.36, that somehow that would the elimination actually result in people coming to live in the city when in fact, like, your research would show that relative tax on living here in the city would probably dissuade people perhaps from being residents. So,
right.
I value this conversation so much, and I think it's very complex, but I do hope that there is an attentiveness about how business life and residential quality of life should not necessarily be separated. It's hard to do that with taxes, but I think we're trying to draw some sort of we're wanting to draw some line better, but
yeah.
Did you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Just really quickly, I absolutely agree with one clarifying comment, and then I really do agree with your comment about the fact that the non-resident is enjoying the police officers from 8 to 6 during the day, and the non-resident worker is getting services. And the question is, shouldn't they not pay for them? And the answer is yes, they should pay for them. And then the question is, how do you get them to pay for it? You're not going to have a little fee. Are you going out to the park, give me $1? You're not going to do that. I think the real issue, you're never going to nail down the exact number. So literally, if you came to me and said, give me a non-resident, we don't want it to be zero. I do not want the non-resident wage tax to be zero. You say to me, give me a number. I got to make policy. That's your job. I'd say 1%. Okay? And so what does that mean? A person who's making $100,000 contributes $1,000 a year towards city services, such as police officers, maintenance of parks, picking up the trash, et cetera, et cetera. It's the extra $3,000 that becomes a deterrent, in some sense, for the firm being here. And so, a 1%, if you ask me to pick a target, I would say 1% is probably not going to have any real consequences for firm location. And would contribute to the kind of user fee, in quotation, connection that I would like to see between the business and the provision of services.
For clarity, that is a direct ratio between your idea about the individual and its relationship with tax and the city, but it does not factor in the fact that the loss of the $3,000 would in fact dramatically affect, for example, the ability of the city to deliver on transit, the ability of the city to deliver on
absolutely.
other things.
I think my proposals are, if I could do it, I would say keep the budget fixed, and then alter the mix of taxes in a way that lowers the cost of every dollar that you raise. So move away from the 36 cents tax and move towards those taxes that are closer to a dime.
Yep.
That would be my hope.
Yeah, and I think that, negotiating that line is some of the things there are multiple proposals that are out there. We're certainly exploring it. I do think the uniformity clause in Pennsylvania does have an issue for us. It's why you see so many different tax structures. No one loves the UNO tax, but frankly, we need a school business tax, and that is exactly what that thing is. It's a tax on business, recognizing that businesses earn more money than a resident, and that money goes 100% into our public schools. So it's important for us to recognize that. I think Jeff said this really well, Mr. Hornstein said this really well, that we have both a city and a state issue, and I think some proposals that are out there are trying to address some of that. I did want to ask a little bit about, evolution of taxes. So we currently have a federal administration that is in love with, the idea of the trickle-down theory of, 30, 40 years, and firmly believes that a massive tax cut that has gone through at $1.5 trillion will result in massive benefits to folks like me, who has 3 kids, trying to put 2 of them through college, and, I'll see how this affects me over the next, 10 years of my life. But similarly, we have a tax abatement program in Philadelphia that is 2 decades old. Our city has evolved and changed and grown. I think there is nothing ever wrong with any type of specific proposal or any idea. I don't want to disparage any of those, but I do think there's an issue when we get wedded and stuck in ideas that were built for cities decades ago. Cities evolve, taxation evolves, communities evolve, people's ideas of what they want out of life evolve. And I'm wondering if you could offer some solutions or some perspectives on how you might improve or alter or expand on the city's current tax abatement program.
I have not looked at the details of the abatement program. I think it, as you implied...
It hasn't changed.
I'm sorry?
It hasn't really changed.
Okay. Well,
it's uniform across the city.
As you implied, and I was here when the whole system went into effect, there were properties that were half-built, sitting in the city, and nobody finding the wherewithal to go ahead with them. I think of the Rittenhouse Hotel on Rittenhouse Square, which was a huge black eye for the city. Abatements made that possible, made finishing that project possible. It was a targeted strategy for a targeted problem. And that's the way I would hope we would use abatements. You know, not everybody walk in, tell me a story, I give you a special break, but rather it becomes a targeted policy for targeted issues. Mm-hmm. That to me is the way to go. We currently
have a blanket program right
I'm sorry?
now. So would you say that we currently have a blanket tax abatement program, pretty much a one-size-fits-all across the city, uniform and available broadly?
That's my understanding, but I defer to your expertise on the policy. It seems to me that the right thing to do generally is treat everybody as an equal player. Uniform tax rates for all players, unless you can give me a compelling reason, from an economic point of view, either fairness or otherwise, homestead exemptions, fairness, or economic development strategies, a particularly unique opportunity to attract a firm. But those are, I would argue, rare events, not common events, in a tax structure that I would prefer. So I would like to see rate uniformity. I'm happy to have, with the Levy-Sweeney proposal, differential rates for business and for residential property. I think that's useful. But basically, keep things as even and as flat a rate structure as possible.
Mm-hmm. But that's not how we would look at the tax abatement. That's not what you're arguing. You would say that, in fact, the tax abatement is a targeted strategy of development. So we should be more specific, more careful about how we utilize the abatement.
Absolutely. And
subsidies are different from taxation.
Yes, exactly. And you don't want to negotiate with everybody. I mean, that is impossible. So when do you negotiate? When the opportunity looks particularly unique and special and rare? Yeah, I have no problem with negotiating with big players. But back to my comment earlier for Councilman Brown is that you better show me something bigger than the dollars I'm going to give you. You're going to show me an agglomeration, a benefit, a neighborhood gain that in the aggregate exceeds the dollar I gave you. You better give me back $1, 20, 30, 40 cents in jobs, in home value improvement, in neighborhood improvements as a return for that. And that, do I know that for everybody? I don't. But do I know that for specific targeted projects? Well, I'll get down and do the work and try and figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can the clerk please call the next panel?
Jerry Sweeney, David Thornburg, and Robert Zaritsky.
Thank you. Can you please state your name for the record?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Jerry Sweeney. I'm President and CEO of Brandywine Realty Trust. And I thank the committee for giving me an opportunity to testify today. Brandywine is a publicly held real estate company with over $2 billion invested in Philadelphia and over $3 billion invested in the Commonwealth. We are also the largest owner of commercial property in Philadelphia, controlling over 50% of the Class A trophy properties in Philadelphia's Central Business District. And as of September of 2017, we're also headquartered here in the city, so we moved our headquarters into the city back in the fall. Brandywine is also a member of a historically unique collection of organizations known as the Philadelphia Growth Coalition, which is a group of labor, business, and civic organizations organized around one unifying goal, and that is simply to grow jobs in Philadelphia. The city has made great progress in recent years. Our job growth has turned positive. We're experiencing some population growth and beginning to lay the foundations to deal with issues such as inclusive growth, affordable housing, and workforce diversity. To be truly effective, however, we must seize on the moment, build on our emerging momentum, and display the courage to attack the problem and not just the symptoms. Our problem is our tax structure. Not to disagree, but I do very much with a couple of the former presenters. We need to begin to shift our tax structure as advocated by the 2003 and 2009 Tax Reform Commissions to taxing real estate and not business and employees. In the last 4 decades, and some of my slides indicate these numbers graphically, in the last 4 decades, Philadelphia has lost 232,000 jobs, or 28% of our job base. Philadelphia has still not recovered to 1990 job levels, and still lags our peer cities in annual growth. While we grew at 1.3% average over the last 6 years, and we celebrate that because that was a departure from where we've been, the average of the top 25 cities was 2.8%. The implications of this decline are real, they're stark. Our unemployment rate continues to exceed the national average. Philadelphia has the highest poverty rate among major cities and one of the worst rates for deep poverty in the country. Our declining job base also means that 40% of city residents commute outside of the city to find work, a rate more than twice their reverse commute in New York City. From the Job Growth Coalition and Brandywine's perspective, the city's major public policy objective should be to make Philadelphia a top 5 job grower in the country. Every tax and every public policy decision should be evaluated strictly through that lens. I'm on the front line. I'm a soldier in marketing Philadelphia every single day. And there is no question that our tax structure is a gating issue to us growing jobs. When a company is looking to relocate into this city, they see a city that has a wage tax that's 4 times the regional average and the highest wage tax among the 50 largest U.S. cities. Businesses are also deterred when they see a tax structure that adds through UNO and BERT a tax premium of 20 to 30% to do business in the city. They also see a city with property tax rates and assessed values per pupil well below the regional and the state average. In a recent survey that Brandywine conducted in the region, we found that the additional tax burden for a company to locate into Philadelphia could be up to $25 per square foot. Brandywine is also one of the largest owners of parking garages in the city. The viability and the performance of those garages and lots are severely hampered by Philadelphia having one of the highest parking rates in the country. At this juncture, with over 22% parking tax, it has become almost uneconomic to build standalone parking garages. So as part of any tax reform effort, we should be reducing that tax back to the 15% level. The city has set a bold goal of taking control of our schools. That was courageous and necessary. The question remains if the city will have the political courage to effectively finance that undertaking. We should use the school's revenue need as the pivot point for moving our tax structure away from burdening employers and employees and focus on real estate tax increases. Imagine the additional jobs we could create if we simply grew at the average of the top 25 cities in the country. If we grew at the national average, for 10 years we would generate over 90,000 jobs for the city. Imagine the multiplier effect of those jobs. Imagine the labor force diversity that we'd be able to create and sustain. Imagine the increase in home values that would come from that, along with the increased tax revenues from real estate taxes. Imagine the strength of our educational and talent pool. It all has to start with jobs. The best way to make the city competitive is to generate jobs and stop overtaxing employers and employees. Every economic study I have seen indicates that the wage and business taxes are the single largest issues in creating forward job growth momentum for the city. Those predictions are clearly outlined in the work of previous tax reform commissions and stand as a clear beacon today. So fundamentally, Brandywine and our coalition believe that the city should shift the tax burden away from taxing businesses and employees, and we must get on a disciplined path to show a messaging to the community that we are willing to reduce wage and business taxes, and that the city administration and city council have the courage to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm David Thornburg, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. Apologize for my voice, but I got a little head cold working today. It's my pleasure to be with you here today, and I appreciate your focus on this important set of issues. If it's okay, I think you have my written testimony, and I'd like to just offer a couple of summary points, and you can absorb the rest at your leisure. This issue of the city's tax structure has been of great concern to me over the last 30 years in my civic leadership roles here in Philadelphia. I was privileged to serve as the executive director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia for 12 years. I ran a unit of the Entrepreneurial Center at Wharton for about 7 years, and I know, Councilman Johnson, you know I was running the Fellows Institute of Government for 7 years. And in those roles, I had the opportunity to launch some, I think, high-impact initiatives that have benefited the city and its residents. I was a founder of the Enterprise Center out in West Philadelphia. I was a founder of something called Graduate Philadelphia, which is trying to make it easier for people to come back and finish their college degrees. I was also heavily involved in a number of initiatives like that. Despite all that, as I was involved in those initiatives, we kept coming back to what I came to think of as a persistent undertow that was really affecting the city's growth and the prospects of our citizens. And maybe 20 years ago, I shudder to think it was that long ago, but I was convinced by the work that Professor Inman and the folks at eConsult did with us when I was at the Economy League that centered on the wage tax in particular as the culprit for much of our sluggish job growth and economic growth over the years. And one way to think about that question was raised, you know, how are we different from other cities, Boston or Chicago or what have you? Lots of cities have had the challenges that we have had, whether that's a racial divide, tough schools, redlining, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the difference in job growth and in economic prosperity that Jerry Sweeney just mentioned, to my mind, really has to come back to something that is very distinctive, and that is our tax structure, particularly our over-reliance on the wage tax. I was saying to Bob Minman earlier, I think I remember this, I know this question came up, that I had in my head that in Boston about 92% of their revenues come from property taxes. So there's something there that suggests that they have not had sort of the anchor and the undertow that we have had over time. This question is particularly relevant right now. We've talked a little about this whole Amazon thing. I'll talk more about that later, but also referencing something that Jerry mentioned. Seemingly in a short period of time, you folks are going to have in front of you some tough questions about how we raise money for the schools. And you're going to have to try to follow the guidelines that Professor Inman gave you, which is to say, you know, where can we raise the most money with the least distortion on our communities and our residents. And my hat goes off to you in considering that. This will not be an easy job. You know, for those reasons alone, Amazon and the school issue, this issue of tax policy should be front and center. You know, Jerry reviewed some of the story of the last 3 decades in terms of our sluggish job growth and out-of-sync economic performance. And I'm not going to repeat those, but I'll just add a few more. One of the things that struck me a couple years ago was I took a look at a study that came out of the Brookings Institution that was looking at how income was distributed in various cities around the country. And this was at a time when there's obviously, as Councilwoman Gim was pointing out, a great concern about economic inequality. So they had each of the, 100 cities, largest cities, kind of showing their distribution of income. And I was floored by what the numbers showed about how little wealth there was in Philadelphia at the upper end of the spectrum. And I'll just throw you a couple of numbers. In San Francisco in 2015, 40% of households make more than $100,000 a year, and 16.4% make more than $200,000 a year. Well, we know housing costs and so forth and so on, but still 40%. In stark contrast, in Philadelphia in 2015, just 12% of households made more than $100,000 a year, and only 2.4% of households made more than $200,000 a year. Shockingly, even the city of Camden at that point had a higher percentage of very income households than Philadelphia. I point that out only because in your discussions about tax policy, you're going to have to figure out ways to tax people who can afford it, in effect to subsidize those folks that are not able to afford the same sort of tax contribution. And that just points out, I think, as a long-term consequence of a damaging tax structure, that there is not wealth in Philadelphia, as much wealth to tax. So Philadelphia is not only a poor city, but it's not a wealthy city. One other number that I would throw out, which is along the same lines, you know, in taxing to pay for schools, it's a function of the value of the property, the assessment, and then the tax rate. Paul Levy at the Center City District has pointed out that the tax base per pupil in Lower Merion School District, right across City Avenue, is hugely larger than the city of Philadelphia's. In fact, the city of Philadelphia's tax base per pupil is only 15% of what it is in Lower Merion, meaning that it's much easier to raise more money at less pain to citizens and businesses in Lower Merion than it is in Philadelphia. So again, I look at these trend lines over time, and I am convinced that that's a damaging effect of our tax structure. A quick comment about millennials. We've been talking about millennials. I have 2 kids in that zone. Sometimes I wish I call them the pesky millennials because, you know, enough already, right? But just a couple comments about that. Contrary to what we see in the press sometimes, our population increase is not a function of hordes of millennials moving into Philadelphia. It's simply a function of more people being born than dying and international immigration. So the short-term population growth over the last 3 or 4 years, that's where it comes from. And I would say, given our current administration and their attitude towards immigration, I would not bet that that flow of international immigrants is going to continue. The second thing is that, we have to look at this millennial bulge in population as an opportunity, but a relatively short-lived one, unless we get some things right. My kids are in their mid-20s. God willing, in 10 years, they'll be in their mid-30s. And as we all know, in your mid-30s, you have a different set of choices and life decisions to make, jobs, careers, family, mortgage, what have you. And so in looking in that cohort, we ought to be asking ourselves, well, what is it that those folks will pay attention to that would cement their attachment to Philadelphia? And in fact, the Pew folks here in town asked that question. And number one on their list, you probably think it was schools, but number one on their list was job opportunities. So again, to the extent, and I believe there's a great connection between our tax structure and job opportunities, that will affect the willingness, the eagerness, ability of this younger cohort to sink roots over the long term here in Philadelphia. Just a quick note about the so-called Levy-Sweeney proposal that is in front of the legislature now on its second pass. We did sign on at the Committee of 70 to the Job Growth Coalition because I believe this is the most practical and the highest impact move that we could make to ensure the future competitiveness of our cities. As you all know, I mean, the point's come up here, the problem with even rearranging taxes is that we have to figure out some way to pay for it. Because next thing you know, we're talking about firehouses or rec centers or libraries and so forth. And I think artfully, the constitutional change that the proposal suggests in increasing commercial property taxes as a way to buy down a dramatic increase in the wage tax accomplishes that. And in fact, I think the proposal would actually be revenue positive to the city over a few years. I know that is technically not in your purview right now as City Council, but it is coming up for another round of votes in the legislature, I think as early as this March. And I would just urge you individually and collectively, I know there's some difference of opinion on this issue, but to support it, because I do think this is, as I've been tracking this issue for 20 or 25 years, I think this is the single best opportunity we have to accomplish something really important for our future. Actually one final thought. This Amazon bid, I truly believe, and great credit to you folks and Commerce Director Epps and the mayor's people for putting together, I think, an astoundingly good, positive presentation to Amazon. But let's not be fooled. Jeff Bezos didn't become Jeff Bezos by being a nice guy or by not paying attention to the economics. And of the 20 cities out there, particularly when we get to the short list, he is going to be looking for absolutely everything he can get out of the Commonwealth and out of the city of Philadelphia. Probably like a lot of folks who have testified today, I've always had trouble with targeted tax incentives, whether abatements or other kinds of incentives, because they often don't answer the question that people raise, which is, I'm a long-time resident, I've got a house that I paid for a long time ago, or I've been working here, and that incentive doesn't do anything for me. What about me? I've been hanging in there all along. And it seems to me if we can accomplish something akin to the Levy-Sweeney proposal in the short term and present a different tax environment to all Philadelphians, I think we'll simultaneously make this an attractive proposition to Amazon and take care of that problem. It will be a signal that Philadelphia future economic prosperity is for all of us, and that we're not just cutting a special deal, a one-time offer from the folks from Seattle. So thank you again for your invitation, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. State your name for the record, please.
Sure. Thank you for having this hearing and inviting us to participate. My name is Robert Saritsky, and I serve as the president of the Philadelphia Parking Association. We represent 15 local private parking operators and owners of parking facilities throughout Philadelphia. Together, we employ 2,500 people, most of them Philadelphia residents, and pay roughly $150 million in 9 forms of taxes and fees a year to the city. We, along with other concerned businesses, see a looming crisis in infrastructure that will impact every industry in the city. This crisis is brought about by burdensome and excessive taxation specifically aimed at the parking industry. A complete transportation infrastructure is what makes a city work. All businesses and residents count on an adequate transportation infrastructure to commute to and from work, support the shops in their local stores, as well as reach the incredible array of cultural and entertainment venues Philadelphia has to offer. Roads, train tracks, sidewalks, subway tunnels, and parking facilities are all necessary elements of our transportation infrastructure, but none of that infrastructure is free. All of the transportation infrastructure is publicly funded or subsidized except for private parking facilities. The cost to build and maintain parking garages and lots is excessive to build them. In fact, the cost to build or rebuild parking spaces in Philadelphia is the highest in the country. Building new above-ground spaces in Philly now ranges from $45,000 to $75,000 per space, and below-ground ranges from $75,000 to $125,000 a space. Rebuilding deteriorated parking spaces inside old garages costs even more. Yet, without parking, many employees can't get to their jobs, patients can't get to their doctor's appointments, and visitors can't get to their hotels, favorite shopping, museums, conventions, and restaurants. The current state of the parking industry is dire. Taxes have risen so high that parking is no longer a viable business, and parking supply is dwindling at a dramatic pace. In fact, parts of town are already seeing shortages. Many of our city's economic development groups are currently performing studies to evaluate the impact of this dismal condition. And Mike Harris has joined us today, and he represents the South Street Improvement District, and he sees a crisis. He's lost about 20% of his inventory, maybe more than any part of Center City. The tax situation combined with the cost to build and repair existing supply means that developers are deciding to not build or provide new parking spaces or even replace current spaces, even though they are building new parking demand with their developments. Because some developments won't work without the availability of parking, some people will decide to take their business outside of Philadelphia. Philadelphia's public transportation, while indeed a great asset for our city, with a majority of our people using that transportation, doesn't work for everyone. Public transportation doesn't work for everyone. Philadelphia has raised taxes that impact the parking industry 10 times in the last 11 years, which is more than any other industry in the city. Before those increases, the parking industry was already the highest taxed industry. We understand now that the city is again considering higher real estate taxes to fund our public schools. We are in favor of every business and resident paying their fair share of taxes. However, when a business is forced to pay 40 to 57% of every dollar they charge, no business can survive under that kind of taxation, or be expected to satisfy the city's growing demands. We believe there are many reasonable methods to increase city revenues from other sources to alleviate the small portion of the parking industry's taxes that we seek to reduce. In fact, eConsult has validated 8 specific revenue sources that combined would more than generate the dollars needed to recoup this revenue. Specifically, we are seeking to rollback of the Philadelphia parking tax to 15% from its current 22.5%, and a reduction of the UNO tax to reflect the city's own study depicting our overall occupancy. If the city implemented these tax reform measures, we believe the current owners of parking facilities would be able to properly maintain their existing facilities, and developers would again begin adding new parking to their new developments. This rollback would be fair, considering that even at 15%, the parking industry would remain the highest taxed industry in the city. To answer Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown's question, Philadelphia's parking tax is 22.5%. Boston's is 0. On the other hand, if the city continues on its current course with this policy, within a very few years, the lack of parking and the imminent crushingly high parking rates will impact the very tax base that the city depends on. By the way, since, I think we've been in front of you many times, and we have shared some of these reports to you. This is an exhibit of 1,700 parking spaces in just 6 facilities that are being eliminated. Since we did this last year, we have identified another 13 facilities that have closed, and another 1,670 spaces that are now going out of commission. So, thank you for your time. We appreciate your consideration and welcome any questions you have.
Councilman Brown.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Hello. First to Mr. Sweeney, let me seize this moment to thank you for your leadership, particularly around the project in Schuylkill Yards. There is a general sentiment, I'm sure I can speak for a number of members, who believe that you authentically, you talk about inclusion, diversity, and equity, and then you've demonstrated it in a magnificent way, and that should never, ever go unnoticed or unrecognized. If you could simply take that formula and put it in a bottle and share it with the industry, many of the discussions we have, we would not have. To Mr. Thornburg, forgive me if I miswrote my notes here. You said we're not a poor city, but we're not a wealthy city. Is that accurate?
I said we're both a poor city and not a wealthy city.
Okay, so
my point was there's a lot of focus on the 26% poverty,
yes.
But you look at the upper distribution of income.
Yes.
We're nowhere near what Boston or San Francisco or Washington or, as I point out, even Camden is.
Yes. So are we an affordable city?
Sorry?
Are we an affordable city?
Well, sure. But what's striking to me, I moved here 33 years ago, and 33 years ago we said this is an affordable city. And it's still an affordable city, but that tells me that I think we haven't been growing. Mm-hmm. Because, when I bought my first house in Germantown in 1987, I would have loved nothing more. I paid $91,000 for that. I would love nothing more than to have that, skyrocket in value, and it never really did.
I see. So what city has gotten it right, given the expertise that you live and breathe every day?
Well, all cities are different, and you're trying to strike a balance between, I think San Francisco is runaway, unaffordable, and it has huge income inequality problems. I don't know that I could say that any city particularly has it right, but you're balancing growth and the increase in property values, increase in wages, increase in employment growth with mm-hmm. a sense of stability and community, I guess.
Okay. To Mr. Zurisky, thank you for your testimony as well. if we were able to find that perfect balance to roll back parking taxes, who would be the beneficiary?
I think it's a business tax. I mean, we think that parking rates have gone up maybe $10 higher, you know, on the max rates than they should be. And that's a consequence of so many parking facilities going away, developers not putting any. We're developers of real estate. I mean, you have probably the three, you know, biggest developers of parking, you know, in the last 10 years or 20 years in the city, sitting at in this area with the Spears and Brandywine and Parkway. And we're deciding not to build any more parking in our developments, and we love parking. So
because of the excessive building and construction costs.
It's construction costs, but it's tax policy.
Oh, okay.
If you lose money on every space you build, you're not going to build any space, and that's how bad it is now.
Okay, so similar question to you. What city has gotten it right? Because as I was a fellow with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for a number of years, where we traveled around to different cities to see how policy is crafted in different ways across municipalities. So to my question, what city in your view has gotten it right?
It's a very good question, because I'll tell you, building too much parking is a mistake also. Washington, D.C. has a policy where, you know, every building that you build, you have to build parking inside that building, and that really, they overbuilt parking. There's too much parking in Washington, D.C., and they have a different type of a problem. I think that, I think you want to get it right, you want the business to be viable, you want developers to build parking because it's economic, it makes sense, and their developments need it.
Yes.
So it's
and
just,
neighborhoods appreciate it, because the encroachment on neighborhoods is very unfortunate, and I'm being quite diplomatic when I say that.
You know, the South Street is a really interesting, kind of scary, you know, Old City and South Street. South Street has, you know, maybe had like 1,500 off-street parking spaces. They're already lost about 200. They could lose another 200 or 400, okay? Once they're gone and the developers do something else with those things and they decide not to add any parking back, that's it. No one's going to come in and tear down a block full of townhouses to build a parking structure or something. This is really time sensitive now, and you know, the city's own study has shown a reduction of the number of spaces, and it seems to be accelerating. And developers are making decisions every day.
Sure.
And you want them to build this infrastructure for the city. It's for free. The city is the beneficiary of developers putting it in. It's something, instead of having to build train tracks, you don't have to build train tracks. We're building the train tracks underneath these developments. But we're deciding not to do that because for whatever reason, the taxes are too high on the industry, and it's not a viable business anymore. And this is already having a consequence, and it could get really bad because, you know, New York and San Francisco have rates as high as $75, $80 for parking, and we are not those cities. And I fear that people are not going to drive into the city. They're already changing their plans. They're not driving into the city as much. Our volumes have dropped. Okay, right? A lot of it has to do with technology, with Uber, and other things that are happening, but we see volumes dropping, and we don't want to we don't want to push people out of our city. So one of my competitors said something interesting. He said, if you're in the retail business, they're considering congestion pricing in Manhattan because Uber has 40,000 drivers on the road every day, and you can't get from one side of the city to the other. So they're going to put a $10 charge on everybody driving into the city. So one of my competitors said their numbers are off in New York because no one's driving into the city because of the congestion. And he said, well, what does a retailer do when their business is dropping off? You want to raise the prices, right? No, you want to lower the prices. They're going to raise prices on on people driving into the city, and that is going to dissuade more people from coming into the city. We think that it's out of balance right now, and there are ways that there's things that are too low enough that the city can raise money from other sources, which we have supplied you with, and we'll supply you again if you need them.
Please.
That eConsult has done work for us to validate that we can do that. I think the city can do this, and put the thing more into balance and encourage. We're not going to have a gold rush of parking development. It's too expensive to build them, believe me. But you want targeted development and supply to come back in. Whatever's going to happen with autonomous vehicles and in the future, we believe that there will be a need for the parking industry in some fashion. It's going to be different. And not having that supply may be, again, another really serious problem for the city.
Thank you again for all of you for your testimony.
Councilman Derek Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just have two quick questions for the panel. One in reference to Mr. Sweeney regarding your proposal for uniformity clause. Do you have a perspective on where the governor may be on that legislation?
I think the governor has to speak for himself. His administration's been fairly supportive of it.
Okay, good, okay. And the second quick question, in reference to parking, has there been any conversation with any of our hospitality or other organizations, because they would also be impacted by the lack of parking spaces? I know from my own perspective, I've seen reduced parking, places I used to park, but getting maybe some of the hospitality to visit Philadelphia Convention Business Bureau, because they will also be impacted when you have less parking. Yes, people use Uber and Lyft, but not everyone.
That's a very good topic. The Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, the African American Chamber of Commerce, have been very, very supportive of this issue. And they have convened multiple meetings with the Convention Bureau, the Hotel Association, the Restaurant Association, the office people. I'm missing some other. We've met with probably 15 different associations. They are very concerned, and if we get to the bill point, I think the chamber is going to have some testimony on this specifically, and they can answer some more questions. But we have gotten a lot of support for that, and we would have, if we get to a bill stage, I'm sure that we would have a big coalition with us, because the hotel rates are higher than the city rates. The hotel rates are $35 to $50 already in Philadelphia, which is high. That's really amazing that it's that high. And I think it dissuades people, from coming into the city. You make a decision to come in for a staycation or not, and you calculate all of your costs. So they are concerned. The convention center specifically is concerned about their infrastructure. I'll speak for the Spears. They have a lot of parking facilities along Vine Street. They want to develop all of that space. I know they do. If they develop those 500 spaces and don't put any parking back into whatever's developed there, the convention center could have some shortages of parking. You have to look at the city, again, as a long-term investment. This is infrastructure that developers are making 3 years ago for this year. So, and we've been complaining about this for for a long time, and worried about this issue. So,
Councilwoman Kim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to be quick here, and so Mr. Sweeney, it's a pleasure to see you. I'm also relatively new to council, and just trying to understand a little bit about, what the considerations are around the wage reductions. So it's my understanding that the current 5-year plan has wage reductions built in, reductions in the wage tax built in to the tune of about $240 million over 5 years. So that is by far our biggest investment. We're not putting that much money into schools. We're not putting that much money into transit and other types of things, but we are putting it into the reduction of the wage tax. And I'm wondering if you can give some perspective about what still, I mean, obviously I understand the absolute numbers about the relativity and how it relates, but what is like not working in terms of what that path is, and then how do we try to think through how to talk through some of those things, because that is a significant burden to shift onto our Philadelphia residents as well.
Well, I think
and I'm not sure that they will be mutually exclusive either.
Right. Now, look, I think the decision a company makes when they're looking at coming into the city is multifaceted, but a lot of it is driven by economics and by political messaging. For a company to relocate into the city of Philadelphia, they essentially need to give all of their employees a pay raise to compensate them for the wage tax. They need to compensate them for commuting taxes. That's exactly the algorithm we went through. We moved our 100 employees downtown. It doesn't cost anything to park in the suburbs. It costs money to park in the city, and you need to pay the cost of public transportation. So employers look at that. They also look at the really almost incomprehensible burden that employers need to pay to be in this city. You have a use and occupancy tax that ratchets up with real estate tax assessments. So now we have use and occupancy taxes almost $3 a square foot. You have real estate taxes a little bit north of that. Then you add on to that the various components, the BIRT, that can be extraordinarily expensive as well. Now, we found by doing a lot of the work that we worked with the Center City District on, e-consult, public financial management, a lot of the foundational work done by the tax reform commissions, was that the biggest gating issue tends to be the wage tax, because that affects not just the employer, but the employer and the employees. And I think that really is an issue where our plan that's out in Harrisburg would reduce the wage tax below 3% over 10 years, which we view gets it into the range of reasonableness compared to suburban counties. I mean, that's when I alluded to in my testimony. When you take a look at all the suburban counties on both sides of the Delaware River, the tax burden to be in some municipalities is as low as less than $1 a square foot. There is no municipality that even remotely approaches what Philadelphia has. So the combination of the taxes on employers and on employees is really very, very important to address as part of the city.
That's helpful. Thank you. You know, as I mentioned again, I do agree. Although I do think that Philadelphia is cheaper than a lot of other cities. We're not going to be as cheap as some of the growth cities. Like if you want to live in Phoenix, I guess people are going to go to Phoenix. But in part, it's I guess you know our current strategy of the $240 million reduction in the wage tax will bring us to our lowest point by 2022. I don't know where we're going. Like I'll have to talk to our finance department about if we continue on that trajectory where we would be in 2028. But in 2022 we'll be below 3.7%. We will have forfeited $240 million, but we will have given that as basically as an important commitment. And I'm just wondering whether you feel like there is that I mean, you know, aside from the recession that we were in, where we had to freeze the wage tax reductions, we have never not reduced taxes. So is your belief that we're not going to continue with that, or we're not, you know, like, as I said, by 2022, we'll be below 3.7, and I would just have to ask where we are going to be in 2028, and hopefully by then we'll have a public school system that is appropriately funded by our state, but we can't always count on that. So.
Well, look,
and you've been a great advocate.
I'm not sure what the recollection is, but my recollection is that almost every year taxes do go up for businesses in the city of Philadelphia, whether it's a use and occupancy tax or one of the other business tax components. The wage tax incremental reduction is woefully inadequate to change the minds of businesses looking to relocate here. $240 million is certainly a step towards positive messaging. It does not convey the confidence businesses need to relocate their businesses here. Because the city has a tendency, when it faces a budget crisis, to tax a ever-dwindling supply of employers and then employees. Employers are easier to tax by the city than employees because the businesses don't vote. But the reality is the multiplier effect on a job is significant. So I think the lens through which the city needs to evaluate its tax policy is, what do we need to do to generate job growth? Period. Now, school systems need to be funded. You look at one of my slides, and it was alluded to by Mr. Thornburg, is the reality is the assessed value per pupil in the city of Philadelphia is less than half the state average. It's lower than Pittsburgh. So the reality is there needs to be a sharing of obligation to fund schools by the Commonwealth, but also needs to be borne by the city. And I think with the city taking control of the schools, which is a great step, I think the city will soon be faced with a decision on how do we finance that and finance it effectively. So the point of my testimony today is to make sure when you go through those deliberations, you start to look at broadening that cost with the benefit it will create. And it resides, that benefit, with the residents of the city of Philadelphia, the residential property owners, not just the business or the commercial property owners. Yeah. And that is what we need to focus on as we go through this budget session. We can't come out of this budget session with school funding being borne by the backs of businesses or employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I've been a big proponent that any kind of major lift around taxation or any kind of funding of institutions in particular, whether it's New York grappling with its own transit system or here in Philadelphia where we're trying to support our public schools, that it has to be shared across multiple entities, that it's not a one industry type of thing. And I think we will show that as we move forward, but it's important for us to have this kind of dialogue. But, again, like this is a city that has a lot of needs, and we're trying to make sure that the needs of business are tied in with our residential life, and I think you know that more than almost anybody else. As somebody who's really invested more in Philadelphia than anybody else, I really appreciate that. So thank you.
No, thank you. And look, it's an important topic, and I appreciate the chance to speak today. Look, I think of the statistics that we've talked about today, the one that frightens me the most, and should frighten each of you, and I know it certainly frightens a number of members of the Pennsylvania delegation, is the number of people who live in this city who work outside the city. Because we've had a good run with young people and older people moving into the city. The reality is at some point they want to live closer to where they work. So when we have almost 40% of the people who live in this city work outside the city, that's a harbinger of an economic downturn. We need to make sure that where those people work is in the city of Philadelphia, so the whole region can grow. So that's one of the things we should really focus on in terms of what do we need to do to make those businesses move their jobs inside the city limits.
Well, I thank all of you for being here, and again, the sole purpose of hosting this was for this type of back and forth dialogue. Can the clerk please call the next panel?
Thank you very much.
Darrell Davis, Stephen Mullen, and Drew Vandenbroek.
I'd like, for the record, also acknowledge Councilman Al Toppenberger, who's here. So I wish Bob Inman was still here, as well as my colleague, Councilwoman Helen Gim, because she had the opportunity to ask questions of her former professor, and she was very proud to have a chance to engage in a Q&A with him, and I have the great opportunity to have my former professor, Mr. Steve Mullen, from my public finance class at the University of Pennsylvania Federal Center of Government. And so when I heard Jeff Hornstein talking about user fees and TIF bonds, had me think about my days and sitting in the class with Mr. Steve Mullen. So it's always an honor and privilege to have an opportunity to interact with you in this capacity. And thank you for your early on support of my career, sir.
Thank you. And one quick note about closing that loop. Bob Inman was my dissertation advisor.
Oh, see, small world. Can all of you just please state your name for the record and begin your testimony?
Good afternoon. My name is Drew Vandenbril. I'm a managing director in the Philadelphia office of Grant Thornton. I serve in the capacity as the co-chair of the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce State and Local Tax Committee, along with Stu Weintraub, who was unable to join us today. The reason I'm here is Stuart and I were appointees to the 15-member Tax Reform Commission that began its work back in 2003. There's been a lot of discussion already of the 2003 and 2009 commissions. This will be a little bit of a history lesson. Not sure everybody needs that, but wanted to sort of level set where we've been on these issues already. It's hard to believe it's been 15 years, and wanted to go back to some of the recommendations that the commission put together and where we've come to. So the commission was charged with recommending methods to reduce taxes of residents, workers, and businesses. The final report had 28 very specific recommendations for changes to the tax structure. It was part of a 10-year plan, and it was really a fundamental proposed reform to the city's tax system to increase the competitiveness. So very much what we're talking about here again today, 15 years later. The 500-page report, which I still carry around with me, it's getting a little faded. It outlined the recommendations as well as how to pay for it. We were charged with keeping this revenue neutral, which is you're looking at now is quite a challenge when you're talking about reforming taxes without cutting services. So that was our charge. The 15 of us put that together after a lot of effort, and all of the recommendations were supported by independent studies by a number of people who've spoken here or will be speaking here soon, to support the recommendations in the report. The intention was to enact all of this as a comprehensive tax reform strategy. That was the optimistic view. We know that in reality, it would be difficult to adopt 28 recommendations with very large impacts on the city's economy all at once. Since we had the commission report back in 2003, a number of the recommendations have seen legislative action. I would characterize them more in the administrative and fairness area, quite a bit on the property tax side, and I don't want to go through these specifically, but a lot of good things were done. A lot of other recommendations were taken to heart that included not reducing taxes. So the commission actually recommended not reducing things like the realty transfer tax, the parking tax, other things. So just to put it in context, out of the 28 recommendations, it wasn't cut 28 different taxes. It was, maintain levels, increase certain taxes like the realty transfer tax, and then look at other reductions. So for property taxes, there were steps taken to modernize and reform the assessment and appeals process that you're aware of, and to establish accurate land and improvement values. The budget-based taxing recommendations and implementing the land value tax were not implemented, and part of those have to do with part of the Levy-Sweeney plan to make changes to the Pennsylvania Constitution to allow for the varying levels of taxation. So there is still hope that some of those recommendations will come to fruition once things are changed in Harrisburg. I guess I'll switch to the taxes that are most often cited when we're talking about competitiveness in Philadelphia has been said already. The wage tax and the business income and receipts tax, or the BPT as it was 15 years ago when we were on the tax commission. We recommended accelerating wage tax reductions. The acceleration hasn't been implemented. Some of the small reductions have excuse me, have continued, but the acceleration that was recommended did not take place. And by far the most sweeping recommendation of the Commission was related to the BIRT, including enacting single sales factor apportionment, which was enacted, extending the net operating loss carryover beyond the 3 years, which was not implemented, and the big one was incrementally reducing the tax rate down to 0 over a 10-year period. So had this been implemented by 2015, there would be no more BIRT, and we would not be talking about that here now. So of these recommendations, the single sales factor was viewed as being very positive to encourage investment in Philadelphia and change the way that the tax was calculated. The net operating loss carryover still remains at 3 years. It's by far the shortest carryover period in the country. And just to give you a sense, this impacts companies that are cyclical in nature, that make money in some periods and lose money in others, but more specifically to industries, it impacts technology, life science, and startup companies that have a much longer investment phase than a 3-year period. So, a biotech company is going to likely lose money in this investment phase for a number of years, never get the benefit of those net operating losses. Pennsylvania has a 20-year net operating loss carryover period. The federal was 20. And as part of tax reform, subject to some other limitations, it's now an unlimited carryover. So I think the trend has been to go longer on the carryover period to allow companies that make these investments and incur losses to be able to recoup them, and to encourage industries to come to Pennsylvania during the growth phase and to stay, and not be scared away by the fact that they won't be able to offset their income and losses. So that's one that's still out there that hasn't been implemented. And then the last one, there's not a whole lot to say about that other than, the recommendation would have fully phased out the BIRT. And again, reminding you that we put together the report with all the analysis with the belief that this was going to be revenue neutral, that there would be job growth, that there would be changes in other taxes like the property taxes that would cover some of the costs of this. So that's something I think, again, that the council needs to take a look at as we go forward. So I'll just summarize by saying that when we're looking at business tax competitiveness, there's two ways to look at it. There's globally competitive, which I think Philadelphia has been much more attuned to lately because of Amazon and just realizing that we are a player in the global economic market. And when we're doing that, we have to deal with the fact that there's federal taxes, that there's a very high, almost 10% Pennsylvania corporate tax rate. So there's quite a foundation of taxes before a company drills down to a specific location like Philadelphia, and putting a 6.3% BIRT on top of that, it stacks on, and it is quite an incremental burden. So that's one way to look at it. And the other is, there's quite a bit of local economic competitiveness, and that was discussed on the last panel, the cost of operating in the suburbs versus operating in the city. There's nothing remotely similar to the BIRT in the suburbs. There's a business privilege tax that is only on gross receipts. We have to keep in mind that the BIRT not only taxes gross receipts, but also net income. So, the playing field is not at all level when we get to to the local economy and the local competitiveness. So I'll summarize by saying that the Tax Commission demonstrated in 2003 that these are the key points. That as a city, we tax what others do not tax. The taxes are too high and the taxes are unfairly imposed. That's a quote from our report. The Commission found that the Philadelphia compounds the problem of high overall tax burden by relying too heavily on wage and business taxes. These are the ones most likely to drive residents, businesses, and jobs from the city. These taxes have damaged the Philadelphia economy over the past 3 decades, reducing tax revenue and the ability of the city as well as the school district to finance citizen services. And most of these recommendations, most of these concepts were again reinforced by Mr. Epps in his 2009 Mayor's Task Force on Tax Policy and Economic Competitiveness. So I thank you for your interest in these matters and would be happy to respond to questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councilman Green and Councilman Green and Kenyatta Johnson. Here, I am Stephen Mullen, President of eConsult Solutions here in Philadelphia. I was Philadelphia's Finance Director and Commerce Director in the late 20th century, and before that, Budget Director of St. Louis, Missouri. In those positions, I saw firsthand the need for municipal revenues and the varying impacts different ways of generating those revenues could have on the strength and growth of a city's economy and hence their tax bases. I was involved in developing and implementing the Rendell administration's initial tax rate reduction program, and I have studied, taught, or practiced municipal finance and tax policy for nearly 4 decades. And eConsult Solutions has been directly and indirectly involved with various tax reform efforts over these years. My academic advisor, dissertation advisor, was Bob Inman, who testified earlier, and I'm awfully proud of my former public finance and urban economics students who are actively engaged with Philadelphia's fiscal policy at high levels in the administration, city council, and the public policy space. It keeps me emotionally and intellectually tied in. I appreciate the opportunity to offer my comments on the status of the city's tax reform efforts, adding to those of your earlier experts. In short, I believe that we have seen significant progress in adopting many of the specific recommendations to make the administration and collection of specific and existing taxes more efficient, and I support the current efforts to collect delinquent, outstanding taxes and to reduce delinquency rates going forward. But I think we still have a long ways to go. Given the expert testimony that you've already heard, I would like to briefly highlight 2 basic issues here. First, and I think very much in consistent with earlier experts, I consider the city's AVI effort, fixing our property tax assessment and revenue system, to be an act of heroic fiscal proportions. I believe that no real efficient tax structure changes could have been implemented until the property tax system properly reflects real market values of all categories of property. While I still think that the existing property base is larger, i.e. there is more AVI catch-up needed, I applaud the efforts over the recent years to get the system up to the proper level and continuously, annually, adjust assessments to keep them updated. I also support an assessment system that applies a greater weight to land values. But simply, there's no excuse in the 21st century for having an unfair and inefficient property assessment practice. Second, I learned a long time ago that each dollar of revenue raised should be raised in a way to minimize the negative effects on the local economy and hence the various tax bases that you hear Bob Inman and several other experts here testify and call that more efficient taxation and least distortionary taxation. I think the easiest practical way to meet that requirement is to fashion a tax that applies a low rate, and I should have put in very low rate, to the largest and widest and growing possible base. Nothing in my 3 decades of experience in local government finance has come even close to changing my mind on that. In that vein, I would very much agree with the efforts to lower direct business taxes and rely more on the local property tax for both municipal and school district revenues. But not all business taxes are created equal. It is my belief that we reduce rates on the wrong tax in the business world, the gross receipts tax. Instead, the real harm to our local economy and hence employment demand is our own corporate income tax, conveniently named the net income portion of the BIRT, and forever confused, even by tax experts, with the net profits tax. Now that the federal corporate tax rate has been reduced from 35% to 21%, our 6.5% corporate tax add-on is even more of a disadvantage than it was before. This has been partially addressed by the shift of all sales factors in calculating the base, but this is still really a bad local tax. I continue to recommend that every available dollar for tax reform be used to lower the net income tax rate as quickly as possible. Shifting away from this tax and to property tax is a central component of the Levy-Sweeney tax reform proposal, which you heard about earlier. In conclusion, even with these positive steps, I still consider Philadelphia's tax structure to be unnecessarily inefficient in that it has a greater negative impact on the city's economic growth than it needs to be to generate any given level of revenues deemed necessary. This relative disadvantage is well understood by businesses and business advisors, and still significantly harms our economic and fiscal condition, independent of the very positive demographic and economic changes we are witnessing. As a result, our economic future is less rosy than it could be, less employment and taxable activity, and fewer revenues to address the growing needs of the city government and the school district. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This on? Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, members of the Legislative Oversight Committee. My name is Darrell Davis. I'm the Manager of Local Government and Civic Affairs at the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this matter. The Chamber's mission is to attract, retain, and grow jobs for the city and region. We follow principles of economic competitiveness to guide our public policy. We believe that government must be conscious of the overall cost of doing business as it relates to taxes, fees, insurance, and regulatory expenses in order to provide a competitive business environment. Our region should strive to provide efficient services with the lowest possible tax rates. Taxes should be broad-based and not target a particular industry segment and need to be shared equitably between businesses and citizens. In 2003, the Tax Reform Commission provided the city with the 10-year plan to reform the tax system by offering targeted recommendations to increase the city's overall competitive edge. Key recommendations included accelerated wage tax reductions, reforming the business privilege tax, currently now known as the BERT, and amending real estate taxes, all without reducing necessary services the city provides. And Drew a moment ago referenced the status updates with those taxes, tax reform recommendations. The Chamber has worked with past administrations and city councils to enact a number of the Tax Reform Commission's measures. However, we believe that more must be done to improve the tax structure and overall competitiveness currently. Currently, we are working with City Council and the Mayor on a number of local tax reform issues, and we believe that any policies related to tax reform locally should be taken with action by the mayor and council first rather than other measures. As we strive towards local tax reform, we will work with officials as it relates to real estate taxes. Relative to the suburbs and other cities, Philadelphia's real estate taxes are low, and as a matter of public policy and recommended by a number of folks that testified today, real estate taxes could be increased. Politically, this may be difficult to enact because the impact on residential property owners, particularly low-income residential homeowners. But in order to help implement this agenda, the Chamber would support adding more exemptions and waivers to protect residential property owners, like the homestead exemption. The Chamber will not support, significant and disproportionate local tax increases on employers to address shortfalls, and we believe that property tax is the way to go. Wage and business taxes, as we've heard earlier from many folks that testified, remain uncompetitive. When compared to other cities and suburbs, Philadelphia's wage tax is almost 4 times the regional median and is continuing to be a barrier of economic growth. As a matter of public tax policy, this rate could be reduced a lot faster than currently set forth within the 5-year plan. We believe that mayor and city council should use possible increases in real estate taxes to fund the accelerated reduction in wage and business taxes. As it relates to the UNO tax and also a myriad of other taxes, especially the parking tax, the mayor and city council should not raise the UNO tax and really focus on lowering the parking tax rate from 22.5% to 15%. There's a link between rising commercial property values and the amount of use and occupancy due per tenant. In 2012, City Council voted to raise the UNO tax on businesses in Philadelphia by 19%, which equates to about a $20 million increase. We strongly believe that another increase is economically counterproductive and will encourage businesses that can move to do so. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this resolution. We're happy to, continue serving as partners, especially as it relates to the local tax structure in Philadelphia.
Okay. Thank all of you for your testimony. You have any questions from the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can the clerk please call the last panel?
Chris Sierra, John Gossier, and Nick Shinoy.
So I'm going to ask the three of you to do something for me, if you don't mind. And I'll probably all will owe you a favor in the future. Still go through your testimony, but if you summarize it to the best of your ability, only because I have a toddler I have to pick up. So, until universal pre-K kick in, I'm on the hook as a dad. But nevertheless, proceed and pronounce your name for the record. Mr. Mullen, have a good one, sir.
Hi, my name is Chris Sierra. I'm the CEO of ArcWeb Technologies. Thank you very much for your valuable time. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Chris Sierra. I live in the Bella Vista neighborhood with my family, and I'm the CEO of ArcWeb Technologies located in Old City. This is the short version. I was a Small Business Person of the Year for the Chamber of Commerce in 2016. That same year, my company was in the Inc. 500 fastest.
You have to slow down a little bit. I cannot write that fast.
Sorry. That same year, my company was in the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies in the country and number 24 fastest growing in our industry. I was able to bootstrap my company, and that means I didn't receive any outside capital from investors, my family, or anybody else. I spent a lot of time thinking about business formation and how kids in Philadelphia can walk a similar path as me to become more independent. I want to point out that business formation and business attraction are two completely different goals, and I personally believe business formation doesn't get enough attention. How do we create an environment where companies like Amazon are more likely to form here? How do we create an environment? If we had that environment, then what would stop 10 companies from growing to be the size of Amazon? It seems to me that fostering the environment for startups to thrive is going to be much more scalable for us than figuring out how to solve a single company's scalability problems. As much as I love Philly Delivers as our external marketing campaign, I'd love to see Grow 10 Amazons become our internal marketing campaign. We need to make it easier for companies to survive in Philadelphia in their first few years of business. We have an extremely counterproductive policy where businesses must pay taxes almost a full year in advance or else face significant penalties. I've affectionately been calling this the second year slap, since most people only discover this policy when they pay their first year of taxes. So imagine when you pay your taxes this April that you have to pay the rest of 2018 in advance. How are you supposed to pay your taxes on salary when your employer hasn't even paid you yet? It's not possible unless you're already rich or you're lucky enough to borrow money somehow. Every business in Philadelphia is basically loaning the city money to operate, and business owners and shareholders are affected, but also the kid that rents a kiosk at a shopping mall is also affected. I submitted also with this just something from the Department of Labor and Industry that shows the top 50 employers in Philadelphia. If you look at the top 20, only 3 of them are for-profit companies. And I would say that it just shows a systemic problem throughout the city. And it's against, to some degree, for-profit companies in this town. And I would argue that this unfair tax policy is one of the reasons. Councilman Dom earlier even pointed out the real estate problem with nonprofits and how much real estate they actually own relative to how much tax they pay, which is approximately a third. I'm certainly not the first person to raise the issue, and it was mentioned in recommendation 21 by the Tax Reform Commission in 2003. I was delighted recently to discover that Councilman Taubenberger, nice to meet you, recently proposed bill number 180077 to specifically address this issue for new companies that are being formed. And I'll just say business attraction is important for our city, and I'd like to see even more attention on business formation so that we can grow 10 Amazons.
See, that whole grow 10 Amazons alone is very insightful perspective. Thank you very much for your testimony.
My pleasure. Don't forget the second year slap.
Second year slap, that was a good one as well. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is John Gossier. I am the founder and CEO of a venture capital fund called Southbox, $30 million fund, co-located between here and Philly and New York. I'm going to summarize my points because I think many of them have been made better and more eloquently earlier today. But the main thing that I think about as an investor is how to create enabling environments for startups to grow. And I think the city should start to think about its ecosystem in the same way. There's a study that came out of San Francisco. It was not necessarily limited to San Francisco, but it looked at the rate of job creation by the tech sector in the greater economy, and it found that for every tech job or startup job created, 4.3 non-startup, non-tech jobs were created in the ecosystem. So that's a pretty significant driver of growth. Additionally, another study by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce found that 50% of new jobs created in the country are coming from startups of some type. So it's critical to think about the opportunity to support companies in their infancy. And I think the only ask that I have that would be different from most of the remarks made earlier today is to create a distinction. We talked about targeting regions, geographic regions. We talked about targeting big corporate companies. I think the city should think about ways of targeting the drivers of growth at the small end, those companies, to Chris's point, that can become the Amazons of tomorrow. They don't come about if they get snuffed out in their infancy. And so I think that we should create some sort of designation to define what a startup is to the city. And to me, what I think makes sense is companies that have capitalization, meaning revenues or capital raised of less than $5 million. Those companies likely have no revenue, and if they do have revenue, they probably aren't profitable yet. And I think it decouples the definition from anything that's time-based or region-based. It's really all about the capital. The second thing that I think would be encouraging to investors is to look at deferral on stock options for investors. It attracts capital from outside the region to Philly, which is something we desperately need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Chairman Johnson, my name is Narasimha Shenoy. I am the founding President and CEO of the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. You have a written testimony with you. I will not go through it, but I'd like to make a couple of points, if you may. Most of our members are basically in the suburban counties. One of the reasons is it's easy to do business in suburban counties, the tax laws and the commuting and the whole works. And second thing is there's a perception that the city is not a business-friendly city. And the prediction, they cannot predict down the road what taxes they have to pay if they move into the city. So something you need to consider. Another point I need to make is basically we have a lot of immigration populations coming into the city. They are here to stay. There are businesses, they're opening up businesses, and we need to provide some tax, when you do the tax reforms, consider a startup help and also help to grow the business because they come from different culture and the different tax in their minds. So something educational process needs to be done because they need an employment, and the businesses will give them an employment. And this is something we request you to consider that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I want to take a moment and sincerely thank all three of you for your testimony. But to the two gentlemen that are businessmen, we really thank you for taking time out running your day-to-day business to give us an insight as being small business developers who are taking your business to the next level. And when you talk about making sure we don't snuff out the small businesses before they even get a chance to develop, that's refreshing to hear because it also gives us a chance. We hear from Comcast, we hear from the Brandywines of the world, we hear from the Liberty Property Trust corporations of the world, but hearing from you specifically on how we should target and help businesses get to the next level, it's also refreshing. So I'll follow up with my colleague, Councilman Tottenberger.
I think it's a point well taken, and I'm not going to take much time because we've been here for a long time, but
Councilman Johnson, thank you for your leadership on this issue, very, very important. And also thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. It is well appreciated. This is the place and the time that we have interaction between constituents, businesses in this case, and elected officials. I think it's very, very valuable. And I know you were here a long time, but I want to say that your wait was quite worth it, and particularly you've heard from both of us. Councilman and Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to say a word.
Oh, of course, thank you very much. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you.
This concludes our testimony for today's hearing. We'll stand in recess to the call of the chair. And again, I want to thank everyone for coming down for their testimony.